Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we stand beneath the pale bulk of Dover Castle in the year 1216, with the wind rolling in from the channel and tugging impatiently at your woolen clothes. Above you, towers rise against a grey English sky, their chalky stone catching what little daylight manages to squeeze through the clouds. Somewhere overhead, a raven complains from a battlement. Somewhere behind the walls, a horse stamps on wet ground, and somewhere nearby, something smells suspiciously like an open drain. This is medieval England. After all, scenic, dramatic, historically important, and not especially interested in your comfort. You're about to discover what living inside one of the most formidable castles in Europe actually feels like during one of the most dangerous years in its history. And despite everything films have taught you about heroic knights, roaring fireplaces, and magnificent feasts, you probably won't survive this particularly well. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from, and what time it is there. It is always strangely comforting to imagine people drifting towards sleep together from different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, and follow the road upward. Your boots press into mud as you climb toward Dover's defences. The castle dominates the ridge above the town, occupying ground that has mattered strategically for centuries. Dover faces the narrowest part of the English Channel, making this landscape one of England's most important gateways to continental Europe. That geographical fact explains almost everything around you. Long before your imaginary arrival in 1216, Romans recognised Dover's importance. Anglo-Saxons used the heights too, but the immense fortress looming over you owes much of its recognisable medieval form to King Henry II, who poured enormous resources into Dover during the later 12th century. At its heart stands the Great Tower. Even from outside, it is difficult to ignore. It rises roughly 25 metres into the air, with immensely thick walls and a severe rectangular shape that communicates a fairly straightforward message. Please reconsider whatever hostile idea brought you here. Around it spreads a much larger defensive complex of walls, towers, gates, earthworks, buildings, yards, and passages. This is not merely a large house surrounded by a convenient wall. Dover is a military landscape, and in 1216 that distinction matters enormously. England is caught in the First Barons' War. King John has alienated a substantial group of his barons, and the political crisis that produced Magna Carta in 1215 has not peacefully disappeared after everyone signed a famous piece of parchment and went home satisfied. Quite the opposite. Rebel barons have invited Prince Louis of France, the future Louis VIII, to claim the English throne. Louis crosses the Channel in 1216, lands in Kent, and gains considerable support. London welcomes him, powerful nobles join him, but Dover Castle remains stubbornly in his way, and now you're walking toward it. Lucky you. The closer you come, the less romantic everything feels. You hear carts creaking beneath sacks, barrels, bundles of firewood, arrows, tools, and food. Pack animals snort and shuffle. Men shout instructions. A guard watches approaching travellers carefully because these are not peaceful times. Entering a major fortress is not simply a matter of strolling through a picturesque gateway while admiring the masonry. Gateways are deliberately awkward. They concentrate movement into narrow spaces where defenders can observe newcomers, and, should circumstances become unpleasant, make entering extremely difficult. You pass beneath stone arches and heavy timber doors reinforced with iron. Above and around you are defensive positions. The sensation is slightly claustrophobic. Walls channel you inward, controlling where you can move. Your footsteps change sound beneath the arch. Clop, scrape, clop. Then you emerge into greater space. And suddenly the castle becomes less like a monument and more like a crowded workplace. People are everywhere. A servant carries a basket, a soldier adjusts equipment, a groom leads a horse. Someone rolls a barrel across uneven ground. Smoke drifts from buildings where fires burn for cooking and warmth. Dogs probably wander through this world as well, useful for hunting, guarding, companionship, and enthusiastically appearing wherever food happens to fall. The ground beneath you is not the pristine courtyard of a modern heritage attraction. It can be muddy, churned by boots and hooves. Straw appears where practical, waste must constantly be managed. Animals produce exactly what animals have always produced, with medieval efficiency. One quirky detail of castle life is that floors inside important rooms might be scattered with rushes or similar plant material. These could help soften cold surfaces and absorb dirt. Although the old, popular image of medieval people simply leaving filthy rushes untouched for years is exaggerated, they could be replaced. Still, nobody is offering you disposable slippers. You begin noticing something else. Dover is busy because a castle of this scale consumes resources relentlessly. Food must arrive, water must be available, fuel must be gathered, horses require fodder, weapons need maintenance, walls need repair, clothing tears, shoes wear out, people become sick, messages arrive and depart, records must be kept. The romantic image of a castle tends to focus on nights standing dramatically against sunsets. The reality depends just as heavily on somebody remembering that several hundred hungry human beings cannot eat dramatic sunsets. In 1216, preparation becomes especially urgent. Prince Louis and his forces represent a genuine threat, and Dover is one of the strongest obstacles preventing secure control of southeastern England. Its commander, Hubert de Burgh, will become central to the castle's defence. But you are not meeting him properly yet. For now, you simply feel the atmosphere changing around you. Supplies matter more. Strangers receive longer looks. Guards watch the approaches. Conversations become quieter when unfamiliar people pass. Perhaps rumours travel faster than official messages. One person has heard that the French are closer than expected. Another insists reinforcements are coming. Someone else confidently knows exactly what King John intends to do, despite having absolutely no reason to know anything of the sort. Human beings, reassuringly, have always been excellent at this. Historians still argue whether we should understand the French intervention primarily as a foreign invasion, an extension of an English civil conflict, or some complicated mixture of both. Medieval political loyalties do not fit neatly into modern national categories. English nobles can hold lands across the Channel. French-speaking aristocratic culture connects elites on both sides. Family ties, property, personal allegiance, and political opportunity overlap. Inside Dover, however, philosophical distinctions become rather less important when an army is approaching your walls. You continue uphill within the defences. The great tower grows larger. Its walls seem almost absurdly solid from this distance, built from stone in enormous quantities. Henry II had intended Dover to display royal authority as well as provide defence. Kingship is architecture here. Power is something you can touch. Place your hand against the wall. The stone feels cool beneath your fingers. Imagine winter trapped inside it. Imagine years of rain. Imagine thousands of hands brushing similar surfaces, masons, servants, guards, priests, nobles, prisoners, messengers. Castles are often remembered through the people whose names survive in chronicles, but most people living here will never receive that privilege. The person carrying water past you has a life. So does the boy cleaning equipment. So does the woman managing household work somewhere within these walls. So does the exhausted guard whose greatest ambition at this particular moment may simply be sitting down. And that is the Dover you're entering tonight. Not only the Dover of kings and sieges, but the Dover of aching feet, damp wool, stale bread, smoky rooms, barking dogs, whispered rumours, heavy keys, dripping roofs, rattling carts, and human beings attempting to create something resembling ordinary life inside extraordinary defences. Behind you lies the road back toward the town. Beyond that, somewhere beneath the misty horizon, is the Channel. Ahead stands the great tower. A bell sounds. The note travels through the cold air and fades against stone. You cross another yard, passing stacked supplies and men moving with the purposeful urgency of people who suspect they may soon be unable to leave freely. Then you reach the entrance to the massive keep. The doorway waits in shadow. Inside, stone stairs rise toward chambers built for kings, officials, servants, and defenders. and the warm-looking glow from somewhere above is already revealing one of medieval castle life's little tricks. The fire may be warm, the rest of the room probably is not. You place one hand against the cold wall and begin to climb. Your foot lands on the next stone step, and immediately you understand that medieval staircases have no particular concern for sleepy visitors. The steps are hard, uneven by modern standards, and worn by countless feet. Your hand searches naturally for the wall as you climb. There is no cheerful electric lighting waiting above. Of course, daylight enters wherever architecture permits it, while lamps, candles, and fires provide precious pools of artificial light. You continue upward into the Great Tower, the enormous keep that dominates Dover Castle. Henry II ordered this structure during the Great Rebuilding of Dover in the later 12th century, and by 1216 it is already several decades old. Yet it remains an astonishing expression of royal power. The walls are tremendously thick. Rooms are arranged across multiple levels, and spiral stairs connect spaces that range from practical chambers to halls suitable for a king. You pass through a doorway. The temperature seems to change immediately. Outside, the Channel wind has been needling your face. Inside, the wind weakens, but the stone keeps its own deep reservoir of cold. Touch the wall again and you feel it pressing back through your fingertips. A fire burns nearby. That sounds promising. Unfortunately, medieval fireplaces do not transform enormous stone chambers into cozy modern living rooms. Stand close enough and your face warms pleasantly. Step away and the castle reminds you that central heating is still several centuries from becoming your problem. So you develop a medieval skill very quickly. You wear more clothing. The chamber around you looks different from the bare interiors many modern visitors associate with ruined castles. In 1216, important rooms can contain wooden furniture. Textiles, chests, benches, tables, bedding, wall hangings, and personal possessions. Colour matters too. Medieval people are not universally committed to 50 shades of damp brown. Painted surfaces and decorated textiles can make elite surroundings surprisingly vivid. The interiors associated with royalty are meant to communicate rank and magnificence, especially because Dover is not merely defensive. Henry II designed the Great Tower partly as a place where royal authority could be performed. And performance matters when kingship depends heavily on being seen. Imagine a great hall occupied by people rather than museum labels. Benches scrape. A clerk murmurs over some administrative business. Boots strike the floor. A servant passes carrying something warm enough to produce steam. Smoke curls upward. A dog discovers that being underneath a table remains one of civilization's most reliable strategies. Privacy is limited. That may be one of the greatest shocks for you. Modern life encourages the idea that an important person deserves a large private bedroom with a door, perhaps followed by another door, and ideally a sign requesting that nobody disturb them before coffee. Medieval elite life is more communal. Great households are composed of many people. Servants attend powerful individuals. Guards remain nearby. Clerks, chaplains, officials, companions, messengers, and petitioners move through spaces according to rank and purpose. The ability to withdraw into more restricted chambers is itself a privilege. You move deeper into the tower. Some passages feel narrow after the larger rooms. Doorways frame patches of flickering light. Timber doors provide separation, but sound travels surprisingly well through a building full of hard surfaces. A cough echoes. Someone laughs somewhere beyond your sight. A log shifts in a fire. Then there is silence for several seconds, followed by footsteps descending a stair. It becomes easy to understand how a castle can feel crowded and lonely at the same time. One curious feature of Dover's Great Tower is its pair of chapels, including the richly conceived upper chapel associated with royal use. Religion is built directly into the architecture of power. A king does not simply require somewhere to eat, sleep, and discuss government. He requires appropriate space for worship as well. Even architecture has a hierarchy. The finest rooms belong to the finest people. Your own sleeping arrangements depend entirely on who you are. If you possess high status, you might have a substantial bed with curtains and textiles. Beds are valuable objects, sometimes portable in the sense that important bedding and furnishings can travel with an elite household. If you're less fortunate, congratulations, there is some floor over there. Servants and retainers may sleep communally, using simpler bedding, pallets, blankets, cloaks, or whatever arrangements their duties and status permit. Castle occupation changes according to circumstance. And wartime overcrowding makes comfort even harder to distribute. Historians continue to debate exactly how particular chambers and great medieval keeps were used at different moments. Because architectural evidence does not always provide a neat label saying King slept here every Tuesday. Rooms can change function. Households move. Political circumstances alter who occupies which space. That uncertainty is useful. It reminds you that this tower is not frozen into a single floor plan of human behaviour. In 1216 especially, military necessity is reshaping ordinary patterns. Dover is preparing for siege. A chamber intended to demonstrate royal magnificence can exist only short distance from stored equipment. Armed men and hurried conversations about defences. Beautiful textiles do not make the walls outside any less threatened. You wander toward an opening and look outward. The view explains the castle. Below you, the landscape falls toward Dover and the sea on a clear day. The channel creates both connection and danger. Ships carry travellers, goods, messages, soldiers and ambitions between England and continental Europe. From this height, people below become small. You can imagine guards watching roads and coastline, searching for movement that does not belong. Then you notice the window itself. It is not the enormous sheet of modern glass your instincts might expect. Openings in fortified architecture balance light, comfort, status, and security. Shutters and glazing may appear according to location and importance, but nobody has designed this building around panoramic, floor-to-ceiling windows. Probably sensible during a siege. Less impressive for the property listing. You turn back toward the chamber. Your nose is now adjusted enough to separate some of the smells. Wood smoke, warm wax, damp fabric, human bodies, perhaps food lingering from an earlier meal, the faint animal scent carried in from courtyards and stables, and underneath everything the mineral coolness of stone. There is grandeur here, certainly, but grandeur shares space with inconvenience. Furniture cannot entirely defeat draughts. Tapestries and hangings help make chambers more comfortable and impressive. Yet cold air still finds opportunities. Candles provide light but require materials and maintenance. Fires require enormous quantities of fuel. Every comfortable object represents somebody else's labour. Consider the candle beside you. Someone obtains the wax or tallow. Someone forms it. Someone transports it. Someone stores it. Someone lights it. Someone trims it. Even illumination has a supply chain. A quirky detail worth keeping in your increasingly sleepy medieval inventory is that expensive beeswax candles are especially desirable because they burn more pleasantly than cheaper tallow alternatives. Beeswax can therefore signal wealth as well as illuminate a room. Your nose appreciates social status. Your purse probably does not. You follow another passage and begin descending slightly toward busier spaces. The tower is becoming louder now. Voices overlap below. A servant hurries past you. Someone is carrying a basin. Another person has an armful of wood. A door opens and releases a brief wave of warmer air before closing again. Night inside the keep will never become completely silent. Guards must keep watches. Fires need attention. People wake. Babies may cry. Animals stir outside. Wind finds cracks and moans around stone. Yet the rhythm gradually slows. You imagine lying beneath heavy coverings while shadows tremble across a chamber ceiling. Beyond several layers of walls, the castle defences sit against the darkness. Somewhere beyond those defences are enemies. Inside, someone snores. It feels almost insulting in its normality. But human beings are remarkably talented at becoming accustomed to circumstances they would once have considered impossible. Tomorrow there will still be bread to distribute. There will still be water to carry. There will still be fires to coax into life. And before sunrise properly reaches the windows, the castle household will begin moving again for now. You listen. A bell sounds faintly through the walls. A guard calls somewhere outside. The fire settles into red embers. Then footsteps approach along the passage. And the enormous sleeping fortress begins, almost imperceptibly, to wake. The first footsteps belong to someone who has absolutely no interest in whether you have slept well. They pass your resting place in the darkness with the brisk rhythm of a person already working. A door opens. Cold air slips through the room, somewhere nearby. Metal touches metal with a small, sharp clink. Then comes another sound. A bell. Its note travels through the castle before fading into the pre-dawn gloom, and around you the household begins to stir. You pull yourself from whatever bedding your status has managed to secure. Perhaps you have a pallet. Perhaps you have been sleeping beneath a cloak. If you're fortunate enough to occupy better quarters, you still wake in a room much colder than anything a modern thermostat would consider reasonable. Your breath may mist faintly. The fire has declined overnight. There is your first task for somebody. Not necessarily you, of course. Medieval society is wonderfully efficient at deciding that uncomfortable jobs should be performed by people lower down the social ladder. Servants begin rebuilding fires from surviving embers or fresh kindling. Wood is carried. Ash must be cleared, lamps need attention, water must be fetched, bedding is shaken or arranged, doors are opened and closed. The great tower that seemed almost solemn during the night now fills with small domestic noises, coughing, yawning, scraping benches, murmured prayers, the shuffle of shoes, a sleepy complaint quickly swallowed because the person making it has remembered who is standing nearby. Outside, the courtyards are waking too. You step into the morning air and immediately regret it. The wind has returned. It comes across Dover's exposed heights carrying dampness and salt from the channel. The sky is only beginning to lighten, turning the stone walls from black to grey. A groom is already attending horses. This is serious work. Horses are expensive, valuable creatures essential for transport, communication, status, and warfare. They require feeding, watering, grooming, shelter, and astonishing quantities of attention. A horse does not care that Prince Louis may be coming. Breakfast is breakfast. Nearby, chickens might scratch where they can, while dogs weave between human activity with the confident expression of animals convinced that the entire fortress exists primarily to provide scraps. People begin moving through the yards in recognizable patterns. Some carry buckets, others carry baskets. A man shoulders firewood. A servant transports vessels toward the kitchens. A soldier finishing a watch looks considerably less heroic than the illuminated manuscript promised you. He's tired, cold, and probably thinking about food. This is one of the mainstream realities of medieval castles, that romantic images easily hide a major fortress requires a substantial household and workforce. Soldiers are only part of the population. Clerks, chaplains, cooks, grooms, craftsmen, labourers, servants, messengers, and administrators all contribute to keeping the place functioning, and Dover needs plenty of functioning. A castle does not maintain itself. Stonework deteriorates, timber rots, iron rusts, roofs leak, weapons require repair, clothing tears, food spoils, wells and water systems demand care. If everybody spends the day staring dramatically toward France, the fortress will become uninhabitable surprisingly quickly. You follow a servant carrying water. The vessel is heavy. Water is among the least glamorous necessities of siege preparation, and one of the most important. People need it for drinking, cooking, brewing, limited washing, animals, and various household tasks. Carrying it is exhausting. There are no taps waiting conveniently in every chamber. Imagine lifting a full container, feel the weight pull against your arms. Now imagine stairs, lots of stairs. Suddenly the person carrying water through the great tower seems rather more impressive than the knight posing beside a sword. As daylight strengthens, administrative life begins as well. Dover Castle is not simply a pile of stone occupied by fighters. Written orders, accounts, inventories, payments, correspondence, and records matter to royal government. Clerks trained in writing and administration inhabit a world very different from that of labourers outside, though both are essential. A clerk bends over parchment. His tools are modest compared with your modern desk. Ink, quill, parchment, wax, seals, yet documents moving through places like Dover can carry commands with consequences far beyond these walls. The odd little detail is that parchment itself is animal skin, carefully prepared into a writing surface. Your bureaucratic paperwork therefore begins with livestock. Try explaining that to the office printer. The castle chapel contributes another rhythm. For clergy, canonical hours divide the day through prayer. Not everyone inside Dover follows the complete monastic schedule, because this is not a monastery, but religious observance remains woven deeply into daily life. A chaplain might serve the spiritual needs of elite residents and members of the household. Morning prayer is not merely a private lifestyle choice. The supernatural world feels immediate. Saints, sin, salvation, divine judgment, relics. Blessings these belong naturally within how people understand reality. You pass someone making the sign of the cross. Perhaps he's especially devout. Perhaps he's frightened. In 1216 those conditions are not mutually exclusive. Rumours about the approaching conflict circulate again. One soldier has heard that Louis commands overwhelming forces, another dismisses the story. A messenger has supposedly arrived during the night. Someone claims King John is gathering men. Nobody seems to possess the complete picture. You begin to understand how information works in a medieval fortress, slowly, unevenly, and often accompanied by confidence entirely unrelated to accuracy. Historians still argue whether surviving administrative records allow us to reconstruct the exact size and composition of Dover's garrison at every stage of the 1216 siege. Medieval numbers can be difficult. Chroniclers may exaggerate. Records may be incomplete, and personnel can change as circumstances develop. To you, standing in the yard, the precise figure matters less than the sensation. There are many people here, and every one of them could consume something: bread, ale, water, fuel, space, time. The morning grows louder. From the kitchens comes the promise of food and the certainty of smoke. Bread forms a central part of the medieval diet. Ale is common too, although the simplistic modern claim that medieval people drink ale only because all water is universally unsafe is misleading. People do drink water when good sources are available. Still, brewing matters enormously, so does bread production. Grain must be acquired, stored, ground, baked, and distributed. You catch the warm smell of baking and instinctively turn toward it. After cold stone and damp air, the scent is almost luxurious. Then another smell arrives from the opposite direction. Stable waste. There we are. Balance restored. Servants sweep, carry, scrape, fetch, lift, wash, chop, mend, and organise. Much of their labour disappears from formal narratives because chroniclers are generally more excited by kings and battles than by the person cleaning yesterday's mess from a floor. But remove these workers and Dover collapses without a single enemy touching the walls. The same is true of craftsmen. A blacksmith or other metal worker can repair vital fittings and equipment. Carpenters work with timber used throughout castle life. Masons understand the walls in ways most soldiers never will. During siege conditions, practical knowledge becomes a weapon. Can you strengthen that door? Repair that bow? Move that timber patch? That damaged structure? Make something useful from whatever remains? Those questions will become increasingly urgent. For now, though the day still resembles ordinary castle life. You pass a young servant whose expression suggests he has been awake far too long. He carries a basket toward a doorway, nearly collides with a guard, apologizes, and continues. A dog follows him, possibly from loyalty, almost certainly because of the basket. Above, guards occupy their positions along the defences. Below, cooks prepare food, clerks work, grooms tend animals, chaplains pray, officers speak with soldiers. Someone empties something you prefer not to investigate, and slowly you recognise the castle not as one building but as a living organism. Every person is a moving part. Every task connects to another. The soldier needs bread, the baker needs flour, the oven needs fuel, the fuel needs transport, the cart needs a horse, the horse needs fodder, the fodder needs storage. And somebody, somewhere, needs to count all of it, especially now, because beyond the walls, political crisis is moving closer. Soon these gates may close against an enemy, and everything Dover needs will have to survive behind stone. Your stomach interrupts this thought with admirable timing. The smell from the cooking areas has become stronger. Smoke drifts low across the yard, carrying hints of bread, hot fat, onions, perhaps fish or meat depending on supplies and the religious calendar. A kitchen worker disappears through a doorway. You follow, the heat rises. Pots knock against hard surfaces. A knife begins its steady chopping, and before you have even eaten, you're about to discover how much labour and how much questionable hygiene is required to feed a fortress. The kitchen receives you with heat first and information second. After the cold passages of the great tower, the warmth feels wonderful for approximately 3 breaths. Then smoke reaches your eyes. Somebody squeezes past carrying a heavy pot, and you realise that standing in a medieval kitchen is rather like standing inside an extremely ambitious fireplace. Flames crackle beneath cooking vessels. Wood snaps, iron scrapes against stone. Knives strike boards in steady rhythms, while servants move around one another with the practiced coordination of people who cannot afford to stop whenever somebody gets in the way. You wisely get in the way. A cook gives you a look. You move. Breakfast inside Dover Castle depends heavily upon status, season, available supplies, religious restrictions, and circumstance. There is no single medieval menu eaten by everyone from commander to stable boy. Rank follows you to the table just as faithfully as it follows you to bed. Bread, however, is difficult to escape. Grain lies near the centre of medieval English food culture. Wheat produces desirable bread for those who can obtain it, while other grains can appear according to region, supply, price, and social position. Bread is not merely an accompaniment to politely waiting beside the main course. For many people, it represents a substantial portion of daily nourishment, and feeding a fortress requires an impressive quantity of it. You watch dough being handled near the heat. Flour dust settles on hands and clothing. The smell of baking bread pushes briefly through the smoke, warm and familiar enough that for one moment the 13th century feels almost comfortable. Then somebody walks past with a bucket whose contents you prefer not to identify. There it is again. Medieval balance. Large households purchase, transport, preserve, store, and prepare food through complicated networks. Grain, livestock, fish, salt, cheese, ale, wine, vegetables, herbs, and other provisions may pass through many hands before reaching a table. Dover's position makes supply especially interesting. The castle stands above an important port, and in normal circumstances goods can move through the surrounding region and maritime routes during war. However, access becomes uncertain, and approaching siege transforms every barrel into a calculation. How long will it last? How many mouths are inside? How much can be stored? What spoils first? What happens if relief does not arrive? Nobody can eat optimism, so stores matter. You pass containers holding provisions protected as carefully as circumstances allow. Grain has enemies even before Prince Louis arrives. Moisture can ruin it. Insects can infest it. Rodents possess neither political loyalty nor respect for military inventories. A rat does not care whether the grain belongs to King John. A rat is politically independent. Preserving food therefore becomes essential. Salting, drying, smoking, and other techniques extend the usefulness of meat and fish. Salt itself is valuable because preservation can determine whether supplies remain edible weeks or months later. Later, fish deserves particular attention. The medieval Christian calendar contains numerous days when religious practice restricts meat consumption. Fish consequently occupies an important place in elite and institutional diets. Although exactly what appears depends upon wealth and availability, freshwater fish can come from managed ponds and rivers. Marine fish travel inland through trade. Herring is particularly significant in medieval Northern European food culture because it can be preserved and transported effectively. You may find fish on your plate far more often than your modern bedtime imagination requested. And then there is ale. Ale is consumed widely and provides calories as well as refreshment. Brewing is skilled work, often deeply connected with household production and commercial activity. But remember the correction from this morning: medieval people are not wandering around permanently dehydrated because they believe every drop of water contains instant death. They know good water matters. At Dover, obtaining and maintaining water during siege conditions is crucial. The castle's medieval designers paid serious attention to water supply, and wells provide access that becomes particularly valuable when an enemy can interfere with external sources. The ability to remain supplied within defensive walls is one of those less glamorous advantages that can decide whether a fortress continues resisting. You lean toward a bucket. The water looks ordinary. That is precisely what you want from water. Washing is another matter. People in the Middle Ages do wash themselves. Despite the enduring stereotype that Europeans spend 1,000 years heroically avoiding contact with water, hands are especially important around meals. Basins can be brought for washing, particularly in elite settings, and personal cleanliness carries social as well as practical significance. But your expectations need adjustment. There is no modern bathroom with tiled walls, endless hot water, shampoo, extractor fan, and a little bottle claiming to contain alpine tranquility. Heating water requires fuel and labour. Carrying it requires more labour. Disposing of it afterward requires still more. Every warm wash represents somebody hauling something somewhere. Soap exists too, made in various forms from fats or oils combined with alkaline substances, yet bathing habits differ by period, place, status, circumstance, and purpose. Cleanliness is real, so is dirt. Both can occupy the same person before lunch. Your attention returns to the food. A higher status table may enjoy meat such as beef, pork, mutton, poultry, or game depending on circumstance and entitlement. Spices can appear in wealthy households, and imported seasonings communicate access to extensive trade networks. Pepper is familiar and valuable. Other spices may include cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and saffron. Medieval elite cuisine can combine flavours. Modern diners sometimes assume belong to much later cooking traditions. Sweet and savoury ingredients mingle readily. Sauces may be sharpened with vinegar or verjuice, the acidic juice of unripe grapes or similar sour fruit. Here is one detail that tends to surprise modern visitors. People can use slices or slabs of stale bread called trenchers as eating surfaces. Particularly in certain dining contexts, food rests upon the bread, which absorbs juices and sauces. Your plate may therefore become increasingly edible as dinner progresses. Convenient, though perhaps not dishwasher safe. Etiquette matters enormously at elite tables. Hand washing, seating order, serving practices, carving, sharing vessels, and behaviour all reflect hierarchy. You do not simply sit wherever there is space. You certainly do not wander up beside the commander and say, "Scoot over." Status has an architecture even during meals. Those of lower rank receive different portions and qualities of food. Servants may consume leftovers or provisions allocated according to household practice. The important point is not that everybody inside Dover eats miserably. It is that access to variety, quantity, and quality is unequal. Meanwhile, kitchen labour continues. You hear chopping, grinding, pouring. The sudden hiss of liquid near heat. Smoke clings to your hair and clothing. Without modern chimneys operating with modern efficiency, enclosed cooking spaces can become deeply smoky. Though medieval builders do create vents, hearth arrangements, and chimneys to manage combustion, researchers disagree about how consistently particular cooking spaces at major castles were arranged and used across different periods, especially because buildings are altered, demolished, repurposed, and reconstructed. Dover itself changes repeatedly across centuries. Archaeology can reveal structures and deposits, while documents provide additional clues, but the exact choreography of an ordinary kitchen morning in 1216 cannot simply be replayed, so you build the scene cautiously. Not from fantasy, but from what the surviving world permits. Then somebody mentions waste. The subject you are hoping history might politely ignore. Food scraps accumulate, ash accumulates. Broken objects accumulate, animal waste accumulates enthusiastically. Human beings contribute their share. A populated fortress needs system for removing or containing all of this. Privies, sometimes called guardrobes in castle contexts, can project through or occupy parts of walls so waste falls into pits, shafts, or external areas depending on design. Chamber pots provide another practical solution, assuming someone eventually empties them, and someone always has to empty them. This is perhaps the quiet law underlying all social history. Whenever an elegant person performs an elegant activity, somebody else is probably carrying a bucket. Waste near living areas creates unpleasant smells and attracts insects. Although medieval people are perfectly capable of recognizing foul odors as undesirable, they sweep, remove rubbish, spread fresh materials, and attempt to manage their surroundings. They simply do so without municipal sewage treatment. You step back outside, the cool air suddenly feels glorious. Your clothes carry smoke with them. Across the courtyard, a servant pours water into a trough, a horse lowers its head, another worker moves a basket of food stores towards shelter. Everything you have eaten or drunk this morning depends on these movements. Now imagine the gates shutting. No convenient market trip. No cart arriving tomorrow because somebody forgot onions. No cheerful merchant appearing with extra grain unless military circumstances permit him through. As the threat around Dover grows, food ceases to be merely domestic. It becomes defensive infrastructure. A barrel of salted fish helps hold a wall. A sack of grain buys another day. A working well can matter as much as a sword. You glance upward toward the battlements. Figures are moving there. The kitchen noises fade behind you as you cross the yard, replaced by wind and the distant cry of seabirds. A soldier calls to another. A bow is being inspected. A shield rests against stone. Beyond the walls lies the road an enemy may soon use. Your stomach is full enough for now. The men above have been watching since before you woke. And if you want to understand why all those barrels, wells, ovens, and unpleasant buckets matter, you need to climb to where they're standing, so you head toward the walls. The stairs carry you upward again, turning through stone until the kitchen warmth has completely abandoned your clothes. Wind meets you at the top. It presses against your face, pulls at your hood, and carries the clean salt smell of the channel mixed with smoke from fires below. After the kitchen, even freezing air feels almost medicinal. A guard stands along the defences, looking outward. For several moments, you join him. From Dover's heights, the reason for this castle becomes beautifully obvious. The coastline stretches below, and beyond it lies the narrow sea separating England from continental Europe. On a clear day, the opposite coast can seem almost uncomfortably close. Dover controls one of the great approaches into the kingdom. That is why Henry II invested so heavily here. It's also why Prince Louis cannot simply shrug at the castle and walk away. A hostile force holding Dover threatens communication and movement across the Channel. For Louis, who has crossed from France and entered an English civil conflict already tearing apart King John's realm, leaving such a fortress unconquered is a serious problem. For the men standing beside you, that geopolitical significance translates into a much simpler instruction. Watch. So you watch. The road, the slopes, the town, the coastline, movement in the distance, anything unusual. Guard duty sounds rather exciting until you perform it for several hours. At first, every shape matters. A bird lifts from a field and you notice it immediately. A rider appears far below and conversation stops. Then the rider goes somewhere harmless. The wind continues, nothing happens, you shift your weight, still nothing happens. A military fortress spends much of its life waiting for the brief periods when everybody desperately wishes nothing were happening again. Watches must be organised so defensive positions remain occupied day and night. Men need sleep, food, relief, and rotation. Officers need confidence that assigned guards actually remain alert. That last requirement is worth emphasising. You've slept inside the Great Tower. You know how tiring this place can be. Now imagine standing outside at 3 a.m. while cold rain comes sideways across the battlements. Heroism becomes increasingly theoretical. Discipline keeps the system functioning. Medieval garrisons are not modern standing armies with identical uniforms, standardized training manuals, and neat payroll departments. Military service can involve knights, household troops, crossbowmen, archers, sergeants, and other fighting men assembled through different arrangements of obligation and payment. Dover in 1216 includes professional fighting experience precisely because the stakes are so high. Among the weapons you encounter, the crossbow deserves attention. Crossbows are formidable siege weapons because they can deliver powerful bolts and can be used effectively from fortified positions. Compared with some bows, they require a different rhythm of loading and shooting. Various mechanical aids can help draw stronger versions. You watch a crossbowman examine his weapon, he checks the string, touches the stock, looks along the mechanism. There is nothing theatrical about the movement. He treats the weapon like a carpenter treats a familiar tool. Because that is what it is. Nearby. Bundles of bolts must remain accessible and protected from damp as well as circumstances allow. Bowstrings and other equipment dislike moisture, which is slightly inconvenient in England. Rain has never shown much respect for military planning. Archers need arrows. Men fighting at close quarters might use swords, axes, spears, or other weapons according to role and equipment. Shields remain important. Helmets and mail provide protection for those who possess them. And then there are stones. Simple stones, from a high defensive position. Gravity becomes an enthusiastic member of the garrison. Not every weapon requires exquisite craftsmanship. One lesser-known pleasure of castle inventories is discovering how ordinary objects can acquire military importance. Timber, nails, rope, hides, baskets, tools, and containers may become crucial during a siege. Warfare is full of materials that look profoundly unheroic until somebody runs out of them. Imagine telling a knight that the defence of England may depend partly upon sufficient nails. He may prefer the song about his sword, but he still wants the nails. You walk farther along the wall, a soldier is adjusting equipment. Another checks a defensive opening. Somewhere below, men work on structures that may need reinforcement. Maintenance intensifies as the threat approaches. Loose masonry matters, weak doors matter, damaged timber matters. A neglected section of wall that seemed acceptable during peaceful summer weather becomes rather less charming when somebody outside intends to knock it down. Military engineers and experienced craftsmen therefore become invaluable. The castle itself is a weapon, but like every weapon it needs people who understand it. There is also training. Not every hour is spent fighting, yet skills cannot simply be summoned when enemies appear. Men practice handling weapons, moving where ordered, and responding to alarms. You hear a short command, several soldiers shift position. For a moment you attempt to imagine yourself joining them. Your modern qualifications are impressive. You can probably operate a microwave. You know several passwords. You have perhaps successfully assembled flat-pack furniture. Dover thanks you for your service, but will keep the experienced crossbowman. Questions remain over precisely how individual troops were distributed around Dover's defences during different phases of the 1216 siege. Surviving chronicles tell us important things, and financial or administrative evidence can illuminate personnel, yet no observer left you a minute-by-minute duty roster for every tower. The uncertainty leaves room for careful reconstruction rather than certainty. What you can know is that the defensive system demands coordination. A wall without men is merely stone. Men without supplies become exhausted. Supplies without organisation disappear rapidly, and organisation without trust becomes dangerous. Loyalty matters, especially because England is divided. This is not a simple conflict in which every Englishman stands inside the castle while every Frenchman waits outside. English rebels support Louis. Political allegiance crosses the neat national categories your 21st century mind wants to impose. Some defenders may have acquaintances, relatives, former associates, or social connections on the opposing side. Imagine staring across a battlefield and recognizing someone. Medieval aristocratic warfare can be surprisingly personal for ordinary soldiers. Motives are equally varied: duty, pay, loyalty, opportunity, fear, habit, the simple fact that your commander tells you where to stand. Payment itself can become a source of anxiety. Troops expect compensation under many forms of paid service. and governments under financial pressure do not always produce money with the reliability soldiers would prefer. A man who has not been paid may remain loyal. He may also complain about it continuously. These two things coexist perfectly well. You descend briefly into the shelter of a tower position. The reduction in wind is immediate. Someone has left equipment against the wall. The air smells of damp wool, leather, old smoke, and bodies enclosed in layers of clothing. One guard rubs his hands together, another eats. The food is plain enough, but you now understand its strategic importance after your morning among barrels and ovens. He tears bread, chews, looks through an opening toward the landscape. This is what defending a kingdom often looks like. Not charging cavalry, chewing while watching a road. Then a call comes from outside. Every head turns. You step back onto the wall, far away. Movement. Riders, perhaps. Or carts. Nobody panics. That would be exhausting. Instead, experienced eyes study the shapes. Information passes along the defences. For the moment, the movement poses no immediate threat. The tension loosens, but not completely. News has been worsening. Louis has landed in Kent. His campaign gains momentum. King John's authority is badly damaged, and rebel support gives the French prince opportunities no foreign invader could create alone. Dover remains loyal. That makes the castle both valuable and isolated. The garrison knows an attack is becoming increasingly likely. Preparations continue. Missiles are gathered, defences inspected, stores counted, orders repeated, men assigned to watches. The routine you observed this morning now bends toward a single purpose. Hold, an odd feature of siege. Psychology is that boredom and terror can live remarkably close together. You may spend hours staring at empty countryside, then seconds reacting to an alarm that sends your heart hammering. Afterward, perhaps nothing, then more waiting. The sun moves slowly across the sky. Cloud shadows slide over the land below. A gull hangs almost motionless in the wind. For a few minutes, Dover seems peaceful enough to make the political crisis feel imaginary. Then a messenger arrives. You cannot hear everything said below, but you notice the change immediately. An officer crosses the yard quickly. Another man is summoned. The relaxed conversations along the wall become shorter. Somebody points toward the distance. Word moves from person to person, gathering urgency as it travels. Enemy forces are drawing closer. The waiting is ending. You look toward the road once more, and the landscape that seemed empty a moment ago begins to feel crowded with possibilities. Behind you, Dover's gates stand ready. Below, the kitchens keep burning. Inside the great tower, supplies wait behind thick stone. And somewhere beyond your view, Prince Louis's army is approaching the castle that refuses to surrender. The message moves through Dover faster than the messenger who carried it. By the time you descend from the wall, men who never heard the original words already know some version of them. The enemy is close, or very close, or enormous, or arriving tomorrow, or perhaps already visible from another tower, according to one particularly enthusiastic servant who has apparently developed the eyesight of an eagle. Rumour does what rumour always does. It fills the empty spaces before reliable information can reach them. Yet beneath the exaggeration sits an uncomfortable truth. Prince Louis is coming. The political disaster that began far beyond these walls is now becoming a physical presence around Dover. To understand why, you need only look at the frightened confidence with which people discuss King John. His reign has gone badly. John has lost much of the Angevin lands in France earlier in his rule, struggled with powerful barons, quarrelled with Pope Innocent III before eventually reconciling with Rome, and imposed financial demands that helped deepen aristocratic resentment. By 1215, rebellion has forced the confrontation that produces Magna Carta at Runnymede. You know Magna Carta from later history as a document wrapped in centuries of constitutional symbolism. Here in 1216 it feels much less settled. John and the rebel barons do not simply shake hands after Runnymede and begin several hundred years of parliamentary government. The settlement breaks down almost immediately. The Pope annuls the charter. War resumes. The rebels need a stronger alternative to John, and they turn towards Louis, son and heir of King Philip II of France. Louis has a plausible dynastic connection through his wife, Blanche of Castile, who descends from Henry II. Whether that creates a convincing legal claim is another matter entirely, but medieval claims to thrones have never suffered from an excess of simplicity. If enough important people support you, genealogy can become remarkably flexible. Louis lands in Kent in May 1216. His arrival changes the conflict dramatically. Rebel-held London receives him, and many barons support his cause. Even Alexander II of Scotland becomes involved against John. For a frightening period, Louis looks capable of becoming King of England, standing inside Dover. You do not know how the story ends. That is important. History feels comfortable when you read it backward because outcomes appear inevitable. In 1216, nothing is inevitable. Perhaps John loses, perhaps Louis wins, perhaps Dover falls. Perhaps the man beside you is dead by winter. Nobody can skip ahead. The gates begin closing under stricter control. Traffic that once moved with ordinary inconvenience is now inspected with military suspicion. Supplies are hurried inward while they still can be. Animals, carts, barrels, sacks, tools, and people pass through controlled entrances. Then the castle seems to inhale. The outside world narrows. You hear the heavy movement of timber, doors shut, bolts settle. The fortress becomes a container. Everything necessary for resistance must now exist within it, or somehow reach it despite the enemy. You climb again toward a vantage point, in the distance. The evidence of an approaching army begins to resolve itself. Dust, movement, small flashes where sunlight catches metal, groups of men, horses, carts, standards moving above the mass. An army on campaign is not a single block of warriors marching beautifully in rhythm. It is a sprawling logistical creature. Fighting men require food, equipment, animals, servants, craftsmen, transport, shelter, and enormous quantities of material. Siege warfare adds still more: tools, timber, rope, engineers, miners, missiles. Everything required to persuade a stone fortress that being stone was a poor career choice. Louis cannot simply arrive, shout upward, and expect Dover to surrender, though asking first is certainly cheaper. Negotiation often precedes or accompanies medieval siege operations because attacking a major fortress is expensive and dangerous. Defenders might surrender under agreed terms when resistance becomes hopeless. Attackers may prefer possession without destroying valuable infrastructure. But Dover is not eager to cooperate. Its commander, Hubert de Burgh, remains loyal to John. You've heard his name already around the castle, spoken with the particular tone reserved for someone whose decisions may determine whether you eat next month, for now. However, your attention remains on the tightening circle outside. Enemy troops establish positions, camps emerge. Smoke begins rising from fires that do not belong to Dover. That sight is strangely intimate. People out there are cooking, inside. You are cooking. They're finding places to sleep. So are you. They complain about weather. Almost certainly. The men trying to kill one another still share the inconvenience of being human. One fascinating feature of medieval siege warfare is how much time can be spent on construction. Attackers build shelters, prepare artillery positions, assemble or adapt siege engines, dig works, and organize camps. Defenders repair, reinforce, improvise, and counter whatever appears outside. A siege can resemble two hostile building projects with occasional missiles. The countryside suffers. Armies consume resources voraciously. Food must be gathered or purchased where possible. Fodder found for animals, timber cut, and local infrastructure exploited. Civilians around the war zone face demands from whichever armed group possesses the ability to make them. You look toward Dover town below and wonder what people there are thinking. A castle may protect a region, but warfare also attracts danger toward it. Families must decide whether to flee, hide goods, cooperate, resist, or simply survive one day at a time. The grand political question who should wear England's crown becomes, at ground level, a question of whether your grain remains yours. Modern maps often make campaigns look wonderfully clean. Blue arrow here, red arrow there, battle symbol, very efficient. The actual landscape contains frightened farmers. Back on the wall, defenders inspect the developing siege lines. Someone beside you estimates numbers, someone else disagrees. Chroniclers themselves provide figures for medieval armies that modern researchers approach carefully. Numbers can be inflated for drama, misunderstood in transmission, or based on incomplete knowledge. Exactly how large Lewis's force around Dover is at particular moments remains difficult to pin down with confidence, and interpretations of the siege's scale vary. What nobody disputes is that the pressure is serious. Louis has enough strength to threaten Dover directly, and he has reason to want it quickly. The castle complicates communication with France and threatens his position in Kent. Leaving Hubert de Burgh behind these walls would mean leaving a dangerous royalist stronghold near the Channel crossing supporting his English campaign. So the fortress must be neutralised. You hear the first distant hammering from the enemy camp. Perhaps they are constructing shelters, perhaps equipment, perhaps something more unpleasant. The sound travels oddly in the wind. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Inside Dover, similar noises answer. Carpenters reinforce timber, men move stores, weapons are distributed where needed, water supplies are checked. Food becomes subject to tighter control. The easy generosity of ordinary household consumption cannot continue indefinitely when nobody knows how long the siege will last. Your meal may shrink before your courage does. Or perhaps the other way around. There is another complication. Sieges are battles of morale. Attackers want defenders to believe relief is impossible. Defenders want attackers to believe resistance will last forever. Both sides therefore perform confidence. A soldier may laugh loudly while terrified. A commander may speak calmly while calculating dwindling grain. A besieger may boast that the castle will fall within days while privately wondering how long his own supplies will hold. Confidence becomes another weapon. Messages and negotiations can exploit it. Promises may be offered, threats may be made, news may be distorted. What happens elsewhere in England can influence what happens here without a single arrow crossing the wall. If John wins victories, Dover gains hope. If more barons join Louis, the garrison feels increasingly alone. If reinforcements approach by sea, the channel becomes salvation. If enemy ships control the crossing, it becomes a barrier. The sea below looks unchanged. Waves still break, gulls still wheel. Nature has declined to acknowledge the constitutional crisis. As evening approaches, enemy campfires multiply. One flame becomes 10, 10 become dozens, then more. From the walls, they resemble stars placed on the ground. It is almost beautiful. That is irritating. You stand beside a guard as darkness settles and listen to unfamiliar noises beyond the defences. Horses call from distant camps, men shout, axes strike timber. Occasionally laughter carries upward. The enemy is close enough to hear. That changes everything. Inside the castle, lamps appear behind openings. Servants move quickly, guards rotate onto night watches. No one knows when the first serious attack will come. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps after negotiations. Perhaps after artillery is prepared, you descend toward the inner areas, but sleep feels less inviting now. The great tower remains massive above you, its thick walls reassuring in the darkness. Henry II built on a scale that suddenly seems less extravagant. Stone is becoming comfort before you reach shelter. A small group of men passes in the yard. Conversation falls quiet around them. At their centre walks the man whose burden is heavier than anyone else's inside these walls. Hubert de Burgh. He does not look like a legend. Not yet. He looks like a commander with an enemy outside his gate. Limited resources behind it. And a decision already made. Dover will hold. Hubert de Burgh disappears through a doorway, and for a moment the yard resumes its movement as though nothing important has happened. A barrel rolls over uneven ground. A horse tosses its head. Two men carry timber between them, taking short, awkward steps because neither has quite agreed on the speed. Yet the atmosphere has shifted around the commander's passing. People notice him because responsibility gathers around certain individuals almost visibly during a crisis. And Hubert carries a remarkable amount of it. You follow at a respectful distance. By 1216, he's already an experienced royal servant. He has served King John in important positions, including as justiciar, and has accumulated the sort of political experience that requires knowing when to speak, when to wait, whom to trust. and occasionally when to remain inside an extremely large castle while thousands of people outside would prefer you did not. His loyalty to John matters enormously now. Dover is not simply another fortress under his care. It is the lock on England's southeastern door. The channel behind it connects Louis with France. Roads around it connect Kent with London and the rest of the kingdom. A hostile Dover can threaten communications, shipping, and movement through the region. Hubert therefore possesses something Louis badly wants, and Louis possesses an army. Negotiation is inevitable. You imagine representatives approaching under arrangements intended to prevent everyone from immediately shooting at one another. Medieval warfare contains formal customs as well as violence. Heralds, envoys, messengers, safe conducts, promises, oaths, and negotiated terms can operate alongside siege engines. War requires conversation. Sometimes because conversation prevents fighting, sometimes because conversation is another form of fighting. Louis has every reason to persuade Hubert that resistance is pointless. The French prince has taken London. Important rebels support him. King John is deeply unpopular among many magnates. Much of southeastern England appears vulnerable, from Louis's perspective. Perhaps Dover only needs to understand which way history is moving. From Hubert's perspective, history can wait outside. The castle does not surrender. That decision sounds wonderfully clean when written in a chronicle. Inside the walls, it creates thousands of smaller decisions. How much grain can be issued? Where should crossbowmen stand? Which structures need reinforcement first? How many men can remain awake through the night without becoming useless tomorrow? Which reports are credible? What if the enemy attacks one gate merely to distract from another? What if somebody inside wants to betray you? What if your well fails? What if King John never comes? Leadership during siege conditions is largely the art of worrying about everything without appearing to worry about anything. Hubert moves through rooms where officers and officials exchange information. You linger near enough to imagine the conversation. Reports from the walls, enemy positions, condition of defences, food stores, weapons, men, animals, water. Every subject you have encountered during your first days inside Dover now converges around command. The baker and the crossbowman belong to the same military equation. If bread production fails, the crossbowman eventually fails. If the crossbowman fails, the baker may soon be cooking for Prince Louis. This encourages teamwork. Rationing becomes increasingly important. You have already watched supplies being counted, but now consumption must be considered against an unknown duration. That unknown is cruel. If you knew the siege would last 10 days, you could divide supplies accordingly. If you knew it would last 10 months, you would behave very differently. You know neither, so commanders balance preservation against morale and physical strength, reduce food too aggressively and defenders weaken, distribute too generously and stores vanish. A hungry soldier does not become more loyal simply because the accounting was excellent. Food also carries emotional weight. A familiar meal suggests normality. Bread arriving at roughly the expected time tells you the system still works. Ale distributed after a difficult watch offers more than calories. The moment ordinary routines disappear, everyone notices. Hubert therefore defends confidence as carefully as stone. He needs people to believe resistance is meaningful. That does not require pretending danger is absent. The enemy camp is visible from the walls. Nobody is going to be convinced it is merely an unusually large picnic. Instead, morale grows from activity. Repair this, carry that, watch there. Eat now, sleep while you can, prepare. Purpose is useful against fear. You see it in the yard. Men with tasks complain about their tasks. Men without tasks stare toward the walls. Complaining may actually be healthier. A little grumbling is practically a medieval recreational activity. One unexpected glimpse into military life comes from the importance of gambling and games among soldiers across the medieval world. Dice are small, portable, and easy to carry, and gaming repeatedly attracts moral criticism precisely because people keep doing it. Imagine two defenders crouched near a wall during a quiet hour, tossing dice while an enemy army waits outside. One loses a coin. He is more visibly upset about this than the invasion. human priorities remain refreshingly stubborn. Commanders cannot permit relaxation to become negligence. Though night watches continue, passwords or other recognition arrangements may help control movement. Keys matter enormously. Doors that are normally practical become security points. Access to important stores must be supervised. A misplaced key in peacetime is irritating. During a siege, it can become a crisis. Trust therefore narrows. Dover's defenders are loyal enough to remain, but medieval political allegiance can shift rapidly. Men change sides for survival, advantage, family interest, property, or conviction. King John himself has spent years navigating a political landscape in which yesterday's ally may become tomorrow's rebel. Hubert cannot assume every human being behind the walls is equally dependable. Yet excessive suspicion damages morale too. There is the commander's problem again. Trust everyone, and you risk betrayal. Trust no one, and you create it. You move toward an administrative chamber where clerks work by uncertain light. Here warfare becomes ink. Supplies and payments must be recorded where circumstances permit. Orders need transmission. Messages may be encoded through careful wording, sealed, carried, intercepted, delayed, or lost. Wax seals authenticate important documents. A seal is not merely decorative. It represents identity and authority in a society where signatures do not function quite as they do in your own time. A messenger entrusted with a sealed letter carries political weight in a very small package. He also carries the possibility of being captured. The surviving evidence does not allow every conversation between Hubert and his officers during the siege to be reconstructed. Later narratives emphasize dramatic episodes, while royal records illuminate other parts of administration and military service. Even the celebrated stories attached to Hubert can be difficult to separate from later reputation. What he thought privately, what precise words he used, and how individual decisions unfolded hour by hour remain beyond recovery. That absence feels appropriate as you watch him from across the room. Commanders rarely explain themselves to history while making decisions. They are busy. Hubert studies information brought to him. Perhaps he asks a question. An officer answers. Another waits. Then instructions move outward. The remarkable thing is how quickly one decision becomes physical labour. A spoken order turns into men carrying timber. Another sends soldiers to a wall. Another alters distribution of supplies. Authority travels through bodies. Outside, Louis applies authority of his own. His forces tighten their investment around Dover. Siege preparations grow more serious. The attackers must decide where the castle is vulnerable, how to approach defences, and what combination of pressure, bombardment, assault, negotiation, and engineering might break resistance. Dover's fortifications are formidable, but no medieval castle is magically invulnerable. Walls can be battered, gates attacked, towers undermined, men bribed, food exhausted, water compromised, morale broken. The strongest fortress ultimately depends upon people deciding to keep defending it. Hubert's achievement is therefore psychological as much as architectural. You climb to the wall again near sunset. Enemy fires spread below. A soldier beside you is eating slowly, making his portion last. Someone farther along tells a joke. You cannot hear the beginning, only the laughter at the end. It travels briefly along the battlement and disappears into the wind. Below, a priest crosses the yard. Above, clouds thicken. Rain may come tonight. Excellent. The English weather has volunteered for active service. You look outward and notice new shapes among the besiegers' positions. Timber structures, earth disturbed where there was none before. Men gathering around equipment, the siegers moving beyond threats. Hubert appears on the defences some distance away, speaking with officers. He looks toward the same activity you are watching. No dramatic speech follows. No sword rises toward the heavens. Orders simply pass. Men begin moving. Bolts and arrows are brought forward. Sheltered positions fill. Those resting are warned. The castle tightens again. Then, from somewhere outside the walls, comes a deep wooden impact. Not against Dover. Not yet. It may be machinery being tested or heavy construction settling into place. A second sound follows. The guard beside you stops chewing across the darkness. The enemy is preparing to make stone shake, and soon, inside Dover, danger will become another part of the daily routine. The first missile announces itself before you see it. There is a distant mechanical release, a rush through the air, and then an impact so deep that you feel it through the soles of your boots. Stone answers stone. Dust loosens somewhere along the defences. For one heartbeat, everyone near you freezes. Then Dover moves. Commands snap across the wall. Men duck into protection. Others hurry toward assigned positions, and the quiet routines of watch duty vanish beneath the sharper rhythm of siege. Another projectile follows. This one misses anything important and crashes somewhere with an impressive amount of noise. Nobody laughs immediately. A few moments later, somebody does. Nervous laughter is still laughter. The attackers have brought siege engines into operation. Machines intended to batter structures, throw missiles, and make life behind fortifications thoroughly unpleasant. In the early 13th century, stone-throwing artillery includes forms of mangonel and trebuchet, though terminology in medieval sources can be frustratingly slippery. Machines vary in design, size, and power. You do not particularly care what the device outside prefers to be called. It is throwing rocks at you. That seems sufficient. You crouch behind stone while defenders watch for opportunities to return missiles of their own. Crossbowmen can make exposed enemy personnel pay dearly for approaching too close. Archers contribute where range and position permit. Defensive artillery may answer attackers as well. Siege warfare is not simply an enemy machine pounding a passive wall. Both sides attempt to disrupt the other. A crew operating an engine needs protection. Workers approaching defences need cover. Defenders repairing damaged masonry need to avoid becoming convenient targets. Everything becomes a contest between exposure and shelter. You hear another impact. This time fragments scatter across the ground. A man curses without enough creativity to offend your PG-13 bedtime. Someone checks the damaged area. The wall remains standing. Good. For now. The most immediate surprise is the noise. Films tend to accompany medieval warfare with heroic music, which is considerate because it covers the actual soundtrack. Here there is no orchestra. There is shouting, timber groaning, stones striking stone, metal clattering, horses reacting badly, dogs barking because dogs regard any large disturbance as a personal invitation. Bells or calls can signal alarms. Then, between attacks, strange pockets of quiet return. That may be worse. You wait for the next release. Nothing. You listen harder. Still nothing. Your imagination begins throwing its own projectiles. Then impact. You flinch. The guard beside you does not. At least you think he does not. He may simply be better at hiding it. Experience changes fear without necessarily removing it. A veteran understands where to stand, what sounds matter, and which risk can be ignored. You, meanwhile, are discovering that every unfamiliar creak sounds like the end of civilization. Hours begin acquiring an unusual shape. Attack, pause, repair, eat, watch, sleep if possible, wake suddenly, repeat. The castle household adapts because it has no alternative. That adaptation is one of the strangest parts of living through prolonged danger. At first, every impact dominates your attention. Later, if bombardment becomes familiar enough, people continue ordinary tasks while it happens. A servant carries water after a missile lands. A cook keeps stirring. A clerk protects documents from dust. Someone complains that his bread portion is smaller than yesterday. Your nervous system has apparently discovered bureaucracy. Sleep becomes precious. You try to rest in a sheltered chamber while activity continues beyond the walls. At first you lie rigidly awake. Every distant thud opens your eyes. Every footstep in the passage becomes an imagined alarm. Your bedding smells of smoke and wool. The stone beneath and around you holds the night cold, as someone nearby breathes heavily, in sleep with a rhythm so regular that you briefly resent him. How can he sleep? Then exhaustion answers the question. Eventually you do too. Not deeply, not elegantly, but enough. Siege defenders may organize rest around watches and emergency duties, and overcrowding can make sleeping arrangements even less comfortable than usual. Men remain dressed or partly equipped when rapid response is expected. The modern ritual of preparing carefully for bed would seem extravagant here. No scented candle, no 10-step skincare routine, no debate over which podcast to play. You sleep because your body wins an argument. A shout wakes you. You sit upright before understanding where you are. Men move in the passage. For several confused seconds you think the castle is being stormed. It is not. An alarm has been raised over activity near one part of the defences. You follow others upward. Night air hits you. Torches and fires produce moving islands of orange light. Beyond the walls, enemy positions flicker in darkness. The difficulty of seeing clearly makes everything more frightening. Shapes become men. Men become machines. A bush becomes an entire French battalion if you stare long enough. Defenders listen as much as they look. That matters because attackers may attempt work under darkness, using night to approach, dig, move equipment, or test defences, and Dover has a lot of perimeter to protect. The castle you admired for its size now seems almost inconveniently enormous. Every section requires attention. Every gate offers a possible target. Every tower must communicate. A defender cannot simply concentrate on whichever part looks dramatic. Attackers search for weakness. One particularly medieval method of protection against incoming missiles involves using timber structures, screens, hides, or other coverings to shelter men in vulnerable works. Fresh or wet hides can help resist fire, and materials that once belonged to cattle may end up protecting siege equipment or defences. Your cows enjoyed an unexpected second career. Nothing is wasted when people are throwing burning objects. Fire is an obvious fear. Timber buildings, roofs, scaffolding, doors, stores, and siege works can burn. Water must therefore be kept accessible where practical, while men watch for incendiary threats. Smoke already fills enough of your life without the castle deliberately catching fire. The records and narratives surrounding medieval siege artillery do not always let modern researchers identify every machine with confidence. Chroniclers sometimes use terms inconsistently. Later translators impose neat categories that the original language does not support. And technological change does not occur according to tidy museum labels. Exactly which engine launches each stone at Dover is less certain than the physical reality of sustained pressure. And the physical reality is exhausting. Days pass, you stop counting every impact. Dust settles in places recently cleaned. Masons and labourers inspect damage. Carpenters reinforce structures. Soldiers carry missiles. Servants bring food to men who cannot easily leave positions. The kitchen keeps working. Remember those barrels you watched being stored? Now their contents are disappearing. Slowly, perhaps, but visibly. Every meal subtracts from the future. Water, thankfully, remains available within the castle's defences, but it still must be hauled to where people need it. Your arms ache from carrying, your legs ache from stairs, your neck aches from looking outward. Even fear becomes physically tiring. Then comes an assault. The change is unmistakable. Noise rises from beyond the defences, not as isolated machinery but as collective movement. Calls echo from attacking troops. Defenders rush to prepared positions. You reach the wall and glimpse men advancing under protection. Missiles begin moving in both directions. Crossbows release. Arrows rise and fall. Stones descend. Commands overlap until individual words disappear into sound. You stay low. This seems wise. Dover's defences force attackers to approach through difficult ground and carefully designed obstacles. Walls and towers allow defenders to attack from above while remaining partially protected. Yet attackers possess numbers and persistence. They press toward vulnerable points. Men carry equipment. Others provide covering fire. For a while the entire world seems compressed into a few hundred yards of stone. Timber, earth, and frightened human beings. Then the pressure eases, not because the siege is over, because this attempt has failed. The attackers withdraw enough for defenders to breathe. Someone sits down exactly where he stands. Another man drinks. No cheering erupts immediately. People are too tired. Then a voice calls something from farther along the wall. A response comes. Laughter. Relief spreads in little waves. You realise your hands are trembling. Nobody comments. There is work to do. Damage must be inspected before another assault. Missiles need replenishing. Injured men require attention. Defensive positions must be restored. This is where siege warfare defeats romantic expectations most efficiently. Surviving an attack does not mean posing heroically against the sunset. It means cleaning up before the next one. The besiegers are learning too. Each failed approach teaches them something about Dover, where defenders concentrate, which ground is difficult, which structures resist bombardment, where stone might be weaker, where another method may succeed, and outside, engineers begin paying particular attention to the ground itself. You notice men working near the base of the defences, not merely approaching, digging. At first the activity seems almost absurd. Why attack a castle with shovels? Then an experienced defender beside you watches for a long moment and becomes very quiet. Stone walls are powerful, but stone depends upon earth, and if an enemy cannot easily climb over your defences, there is another possibility. He can try to make them fall from underneath you. Later, deep inside the fortress, you press your ear against cold masonry. For several seconds there is nothing. Then, faintly tap, tap, scrape. The battle is moving underground. You keep your ear against the stone, tap, a pause, scrape, then nothing. The silence stretches long enough for you to wonder whether you imagined it. Perhaps the sound came from somewhere inside the castle. A carpenter, a loose object, a guard shifting equipment against a wall. Then it comes again. Tap, tap, not loud. That is precisely what makes it unsettling. The bombardment above announces itself with crashing stone and shouting men. Underground work is quieter, patient, hidden, somewhere beyond the wall. Men may be cutting into earth with picks and shovels, attempting to reach the foundations without ever showing themselves to the defenders above. You straighten slowly. Suddenly the floor feels less dependable. Mining is one of the most dangerous answers medieval besiegers have to strong fortifications. If a wall or tower cannot easily be breached by bombardment, attackers can dig beneath it. The excavation is supported temporarily with timber. Once enough of the foundation has been undermined, the supports can be burned or otherwise removed. Earth shifts, supports fail, masonry above loses what holds it up. Gravity finishes the argument. Dover's enormous walls seem slightly less comforting once you realise they are ultimately standing on dirt. You follow several defenders toward the threatened area. Nobody knows exactly where every underground sound originates. Listening becomes a skill. Men place ears against walls or ground, trying to distinguish excavation from the normal groans and knocks of an occupied fortress. Imagine being assigned this duty. Your military contribution is lying very still and listening to soil. You would like a sword, you receive an earache. Yet accurate listening may reveal where miners are heading. Defenders can respond with countermines, digging their own tunnels to intercept attackers underground. They may also strengthen vulnerable structures, create new barriers behind threatened positions, or prepare to fight if a breach opens. The siege therefore develops a second geography, above ground. You know where the walls stand. Below ground, nobody possesses a complete map. That uncertainty follows you into the excavation. You descend into a cramped working space where lamps provide weak light. The smell changes immediately. Damp earth replaces open air. Timber supports press close around you. Men work in confined conditions with simple tools, removing soil basket by basket. There is no room for dramatic sword swinging, barely enough room for shoulders. A pick bites into earth. Thock. Loose material falls, someone gathers it, another man carries it away. Progress is painfully slow. The air becomes warm despite the cool soil because bodies are working hard in a narrow space. Lamp smoke gathers where ventilation is poor. Sweat mixes with dirt. You become intensely aware of the weight above your head. Earth, stone, more earth, more stone. Perhaps several annoyed Frenchmen digging toward you. Wonderful. Medieval mining relies heavily on practical expertise. Specialist miners may be recruited from regions where mining skills already exist. and siege commanders value men who understand excavation, timbering, soil, and structural weakness. This is another reminder that medieval warfare depends on professions rarely featured in heroic poetry. The knight receives the song, the miner makes the tower collapse. One surprisingly practical technique used in undermining fortifications is to pack combustible material around timber supports after excavation. Chroniclers describe the use of wood and other fuel, sometimes including animal fat, to encourage an intense fire. So yes, somewhere in the history of siege warfare, Bacon's less fortunate relatives may assist military engineering. You may never look at cooking fat quite the same way. The defenders dig toward the suspected enemy tunnel. Every few minutes, work stops, silence. Everyone listens. At first you hear only breathing, then a faint knock. Closer now. One man points. Work resumes in a slightly altered direction. The sensation is peculiar because the enemy remains invisible. Above ground, you can at least look over a wall and see banners, tents, machinery, and troops. Here you have sound, a scrape through soil, a vibration through timber, occasionally a murmur so faint you cannot decide whether it is a voice. Fear fills what vision cannot. If the tunnels meet, fighting underground can become brutally cramped. There is little space for formation or elegant weapon use. Short weapons and tools become useful. Darkness and confusion magnify everything. Fortunately, you're not required to test your underground dueling abilities just yet. The workers continue. Dover's siege in 1216 becomes particularly famous for mining activity directed against its defences. Lewis's forces succeed in damaging part of the outer fortifications, including operations associated with the gate area, and the struggle demonstrates that even Dover's formidable works can be physically compromised. The defenders respond rather than surrender. That response matters more than the idea of an invincible castle. Fortifications are systems with layers. If an outer position fails, defenders can improvise another line. Block passages, raise timber barriers, dig ditches, use existing structures differently. A castle survives not because nothing ever breaks, but because breaking one thing does not necessarily end resistance. You emerge from the underground work into daylight and blink. The sky seems enormous. Wind touches your face, and you almost appreciate it now. Almost. Men are moving timber toward a threatened sector. Others carry earth and rubble. A barrier is being strengthened behind a position that commanders evidently do not trust to remain intact forever. There is urgency, but not chaos. That distinction is important. People know the enemy may create a breach, so they prepare to make the breach disappointing. An attacker who fights through one obstacle only to discover another has learned an ancient military lesson: castles can be extremely rude. The precise sequence of Dover's mining operations is not perfectly transparent today. Medieval accounts emphasize particular dramatic moments, while archaeology and later alterations complicate efforts to identify every feature exactly as it stood in 1216. Specialists have proposed different reconstructions of where attacks concentrated and how specific defences functioned. The uncertainty does not weaken the story. It makes the surviving physical evidence feel more human. Nobody in the siege possesses the tidy overhead diagram you would like. Hubert certainly has knowledge of his defences, but even he cannot see through earth. Decisions must be made from incomplete information. You watch him inspect the threatened area. He speaks with men who understand construction, not merely knights, craftsmen, masons, carpenters, people who can look at cracked stone and tell him whether it is cosmetic or catastrophic. A commander who ignores such people will soon have an excellent opportunity to inspect his castle from outside. More reinforcement follows, timber arrives, earthworks change. Men prepare missiles to cover any breach. Crossbow positions are adjusted. Everyone understands that attackers emerging through a damaged entrance must be met immediately. Then comes the sound you have been expecting. Not underground now. A deep cracking noise. Stone shifts. Someone shouts. You look toward the threatened defences as dust rises. For a moment the entire structure seems to hold its breath. Then part of it gives. The noise rolls across the castle, masonry falls, dust expands into the air, pale and thick, obscuring shapes. Men run toward prepared positions. You run with them, though considerably less heroically. Through the haze you glimpse damage where solid defense existed before. The impossible has become an opening. Outside, enemy troops recognize it too. Their calls rise, the attack begins, defenders crowd behind improvised barriers, crossbowmen shoot through whatever angles remain. Stones and missiles fall toward approaching men. You stay behind something substantial again, excellent instincts. The breach becomes a funnel. That helps Dover. Attackers may have opened the wall, but they have not opened the entire castle. Men entering through constrained ground encounter defenders who know precisely where they must appear. The fighting surges. Noise rebounds from stone, dust dries your throat. Orders vanish beneath shouting. Then, gradually, the defenders hold. The breach does not become the surrender Louis needs. Improvised defences frustrate the breakthrough. What appeared for one terrifying moment to be the end becomes merely another problem. A very large problem, but still a problem. Hours later, exhaustion settles over the damaged area. Timber barriers remain. Guards remain too. Nobody trusts the silence. You return toward the tunnel as evening deepens. The underground workers are still listening. Even after one mine succeeds, nobody assumes another is not coming. You lower yourself again and place your palm against the earth. Cool, damp, quiet. Your mind invents tapping anyway. You begin to understand why people in desperate situations reach for protection that stone cannot provide. A charm, a blessing, a saint, a prayer whispered before sleep. When walls crack and ground moves beneath your feet, the invisible world can feel every bit as immediate as the visible one. Above you, a chapel bell sounds through Dover. Tools pause. One worker crosses himself, and after spending the day listening for enemies beneath the earth, you find yourself following him toward the sound. The chapel bell reaches you again before you reach the chapel itself. Its voice is softer here, filtered through stone passages and the shuffle of people moving in the same direction. After hours of hammering, digging, shouting, and listening for enemies beneath your feet, the measured sound feels almost unnaturally calm. You follow it. A soldier enters ahead of you. There is dried earth on his clothing. Another man arrives, still carrying part of his equipment. A servant slips quietly toward the side, careful not to obstruct people of higher rank. For once, everyone seems to lower their voice without being ordered. The chapel offers no magical escape from the siege. You can still hear activity elsewhere in the fortress. Footsteps pass outside, timbers being moved, somewhere far enough away to be muffled. A hammer strikes repeatedly, but the atmosphere changes. Light trembles from lamps or candles, wax warms near flame, smoke rises faintly. Painted surfaces and sacred objects give the room a richness that the bare stone passages outside do not possess. You've entered a society in which Christianity does not sit neatly inside one private corner of life. It shapes the calendar. Law, kingship, morality, burial, marriage, food, time, charity, warfare, and explanations for fortune and disaster. The distinction your modern mind makes between religious life and ordinary life would feel strange here. Ordinary life is religious life. At Dover, that reality has been built directly into the Great Tower. Henry II's keep contains chapels intended for worship within the royal and household environment. The architecture itself reminds you that power and devotion are expected to occupy neighbouring rooms. You stand quietly. A priest begins prayers. Latin fills the space. Not everyone listening understands every word with scholarly precision. They do not need to. Familiar phrases, gestures, sounds, and rhythms carry meaning through repetition. Bodies know what to do. Stand, kneel, bow, cross yourself, listen, respond. The routines are old companions. That matters tonight. During a siege, ordinary time becomes distorted. Meals shift, sleep fragments, alarms interrupt work. Nobody knows what tomorrow contains. Prayer restores a schedule larger than the siege. The church's hours continue, feast days still arrive. Saints still possess their days. The liturgical year does not politely suspend itself because Prince Louis has brought siege engines. There is comfort in that stubborn continuity. You kneel, the floor is hard. Medieval devotion is not designed around ergonomic support. Nearby, a soldier murmurs a prayer with particular concentration. Perhaps he's thinking about the damaged wall. Perhaps about his family. Perhaps about death. Or perhaps he's asking St. Anthony to help locate something he misplaced. Because human beings remain human even while kingdoms wobble. Saints form an enormous spiritual community around medieval Christians. Different saints become associated with particular places, professions, illnesses, dangers, and needs. Their relics, physical remains, or objects connected with holy people can carry immense religious significance. Relics may be enclosed in richly decorated reliquaries and become destinations for pilgrimage. To your modern eyes, the idea that a fragment of bone might transform the spiritual importance of a church can feel unfamiliar. To people around you, sacred presence is tangible. Matter can carry holiness. Touch matters, place matters, objects matter. That helps explain one practice that can look almost playful from a distance. Pilgrims sometimes collect badges connected with shrines they have visited. These small objects can be worn on clothing, announcing devotion and travel at once. A medieval pilgrimage badge is part spiritual souvenir, part social signal, your 13th century refrigerator magnet, except you wear it on your hat and take it considerably more seriously. Inside besieged Dover, people may invoke saints associated with protection or warfare, while prayers for the king and kingdom carry obvious political significance. But religion does not automatically produce political unity. That is worth remembering. The rebels outside are Christians too. So are Louis and his French followers. They attend Mass. They pray. They believe God can favour their cause. Both sides may ask divine assistance before attempting to defeat the other. God is receiving conflicting correspondence. The political church complicates matters further. King John's earlier struggle with Pope Innocent III had resulted in England being placed under interdict and John himself being excommunicated. But the relationship changed dramatically. John submitted his kingdoms to papal authority in 1213 and received them back as papal fiefs. By the time Louis intervenes in England, the papacy supports John. Louis's campaign therefore lacks papal approval, and ecclesiastical pressure becomes part of the conflict. This creates a striking reversal. The king who once fought bitterly with the Pope now benefits from papal backing against his enemies. Medieval politics does enjoy a plot twist. You listen as prayers continue outside. War is being interpreted not merely as a struggle for territory but through moral and spiritual language. Victory may demonstrate divine favour. Defeat may be punishment. Unexpected survival may be providence. A storm can become a sign. A coincidence can become a warning. Dreams matter. Omens circulate. You may hear stories about strange lights, unusual animals, prophetic words, or miraculous interventions. Educated clergy can be skeptical of crude superstition while still inhabiting a worldview in which supernatural causation is entirely real. The border between accepted devotion and condemned superstition is therefore complicated. A charm carried by a soldier may combine familiar Christian words with practices a theologian would regard suspiciously. Does the man care? Possibly not. If he believes a scrap of writing protects him from arrows, theological nuance may suddenly seem less urgent. What people at Dover privately believed cannot be recovered with tidy precision. Clerical texts tell you what religious authorities taught. Chronicles reveal selected events and interpretations. Archaeology occasionally preserves devotional objects. None of these lets you enter the mind of an exhausted individual kneeling here after a bombardment. Belief varies. Some are fervent, some fearful, some habitual, some probably distracted. You notice one man glance toward the door. Perhaps he's expecting another alarm. That small movement tells you more than a sermon could. The siege remains present even in prayer. Confession gains special urgency when death seems plausible. Medieval Christianity teaches that sin has eternal consequences, and preparing the soul matters deeply. A priest hearing confession offers something no mason can build: spiritual readiness. You begin to appreciate why clergy belong inside military households. They conduct services, hear confessions, offer counsel, administer sacraments, pray for the living, and attend the dying. They can also read and write, making some clergy valuable in administration and diplomacy. The man at the altar is therefore not simply decorative religious furniture. He participates in the fortress community. When worship ends, nobody rushes immediately. For several breaths the room remains quiet. You can hear flame moving. A candle gives a tiny hiss. Someone exhales, then bodies rise, knees protest. The medieval spiritual experience concludes with the universal human experience of standing up after kneeling too long. People begin returning to their duties. A guard touches something worn beneath his clothing before leaving. Perhaps a small cross, perhaps a devotional token, perhaps simply a familiar object that steadies him. You follow. The passage outside feels louder than before. News has arrived, not an attack, a rumour. Someone claims King John is moving through the region. Another says royal forces will soon relieve Dover. A third insists Louis cannot maintain the siege indefinitely. Hope moves through the castle with suspicious speed. You've learned not to trust rumours. Still, you want this one to be true. Night gathers over Dover. On the battlements, enemy fires remain visible. They seem almost permanent now. Another constellation beneath the horizon. A priest passes a group of defenders and offers a blessing. One man bows his head. Another touches the cross at his chest. Then both return to watching the darkness. The siege has not softened. Stone can still fall. Tunnels can still collapse. Food can still diminish. But fear has been given a language. Prayer turns uncertainty into words. Ritual gives trembling hands something to do. And in a world where heaven feels close enough to influence tomorrow morning, that is no small comfort. You descend from the wall near one of the domestic buildings. A child's voice suddenly carries through the darkness. You stop. It is easy to forget, amid weapons and commanders, that soldiers are not the only people living behind these walls. A woman answers the child softly. A door closes. Somewhere inside, clothing needs mending, food needs portioning, bedding needs arranging, messages need carrying, and frightened people who will never appear in heroic chronicles are keeping Dover alive. You turn toward those quieter rooms. The castle's war is being fought there too. The child's voice fades behind the closed door, replaced by the softer noises of domestic work. Fabric moves through someone's hands. A wooden chest opens. A cup touches a table. There is conversation inside, too quiet for you to catch more than its rhythm. After so many hours among battlements and weapons, these sounds seem almost misplaced. They are not. A fortress is never sustained by fighters alone. You enter a room where several people are working in the uncertain light. A woman bends over torn fabric, pulling thread carefully through cloth. Another sorts objects near a chest. Someone farther back is tending to a younger child who has reached that unfortunate stage of tiredness in which sleep is desperately needed and therefore absolutely unacceptable. The siege continues outside. Inside. Someone is trying to persuade a child to lie down. There are battles within battles. You have to be cautious when imagining exactly who lives inside Dover during these weeks. Surviving accounts concentrate heavily on military and political actors, particularly Hubert de Burgh, King John, Prince Louis, and the men engaged in the defence. They rarely provide anything resembling a complete household census. Yet castles in normal operation contain far more than warriors. Elite households include women and men in domestic service. Officials may have attendants, craftspeople and labourers support daily operations. Clergy move through the fortress, grooms tend animals, messengers arrive and depart when circumstances permit, and some people may have families. War complicates all of this. When danger approaches, civilians living around a fortress might seek protection behind walls, while commanders also have practical reasons to limit unnecessary mouths during a siege. The balance between sheltering people and preserving supplies can become painfully difficult. For Dover in 1216, you cannot confidently fill every room with named wives and children. But neither should you imagine an exclusively male barracks conveniently emptied of civilian life. The truth is less tidy. You watch the needle moving through cloth. Textiles require constant attention. Clothing is valuable because producing it demands enormous labour. Wool must be processed. Fibres need spinning. Thread becomes woven cloth. Cloth may be dyed, cut, sewn, repaired, altered, and eventually reused. A torn garment is not casually thrown away because next-day delivery has failed to reach 13th century Kent. You mend it, then mend it again. Then perhaps cut the surviving cloth into something else. Women perform much textile work across medieval society. Although professional production and household labour vary enormously according to place and status, inside a pressured castle, practical skill matters more than your modern tendency to classify every activity as civilian or military. Repairing a cloak keeps a guard warm. Preparing food keeps him standing. Carrying water keeps him alive. Nursing him when sick may return him to duty. The line between supporting a siege and fighting one becomes very thin. You move toward another chamber. A servant is organising bedding. This sounds gentle until you remember the quantity of bedding required by a large household. Blankets, sheets where available, pallets, mattresses stuffed with materials such as straw, wool, or feathers depending upon wealth and circumstance. Everything attracts dirt. Everything needs moving. Everything eventually smells like people. Laundry is possible, naturally, but washing large textiles without modern plumbing is an impressive physical undertaking. Water must be obtained, heated when needed, fabric soaked, scrubbed, beaten, rinsed, wrung, carried and dried. Your washing machine suddenly deserves an apology for every complaint you have ever made about folding clothes. Soap and alkaline cleaning substances can assist. Laundering might also involve lye-based processes, and professional laundresses are known in medieval, urban and household contexts. There is an odd intimacy in such work. Someone handles the commander's stained linen. Someone knows which child has ruined another garment. Someone discovers exactly how unpleasant a soldier's clothing becomes after several days on watch. History rarely records these discoveries, perhaps mercifully. A young person carries a small vessel past you. Children in medieval households do not inhabit a completely separate universe from adult labour. Expectations depend upon age and social position. But young people can assist with tasks, learn trades, serve in households, carry messages, tend animals, and absorb adult responsibilities earlier than many modern children do. Childhood still exists. People love their children, worry about them, play with them, mourn them. But the boundary between childhood and productive work is drawn differently. A boy may be learning service in an elite household. A girl may acquire domestic and textile skills. An apprentice can spend adolescence mastering a craft. The romantic idea that everyone becomes a tiny adult at age 6 is too crude. Yet so is the assumption that medieval childhood resembles your own with worse toys. Toys do exist, incidentally. Archaeologists have found medieval toy objects, including miniature household items, figurines, and small objects associated with play. Children apparently refuse to become solemn historical abstractions merely because future centuries expect them to. Give a child a tiny object and imagination does the rest. Some things survive every millennium. You hear laughter from the next space. It lasts only a moment. Then an adult voice quiets it. Perhaps noise is unwelcome during an anxious night. Perhaps someone is sleeping, or perhaps the adult is simply tired. Siege conditions amplify domestic strain. People crowd together, privacy decreases, food becomes controlled. Children sense fear even when adults avoid explaining it. A loud impact can wake everyone. A rumour of assault travels through rooms faster than reassurance. If you are caring for a child, you must manage your own anxiety while pretending the enormous stone hurled against the wall was not especially concerning. Just the French again. Very soothing. Women of higher status experience the siege differently from servants. Rank affects accommodation, clothing, diet, protection, and authority. An elite woman might manage aspects of household organisation and possess attendants of her own. Lower status women perform harder physical labour with fewer comforts. Medieval women can also exercise substantial administrative responsibility, particularly when husbands or male relatives are absent. Noble women elsewhere are documented overseeing estates and even organising defences, although you should resist automatically transferring every such example into Dover. The surviving material simply does not tell you enough about every woman here. That gap has shaped how the siege is remembered. Medieval chroniclers usually cared more about commanders and military outcomes than about the people baking, washing, sewing, nursing, carrying and calming frightened children. Modern social historians recover these quieter lives indirectly from household records, archaeology, legal evidence, material culture, and comparison with better documented communities. Even then, some rooms remain dark. You cannot name the woman repairing cloth before you. You cannot know whether she is married. You cannot know what she thinks of Hubert. Perhaps she supports King John. Perhaps she dislikes him intensely but prefers the soldiers outside even less. Political loyalty does not always fit comfortably inside domestic life. What you can understand is labour. Her fingers are sore, the light is poor, the garment still needs repairing. That is real enough. Elsewhere, messengers occupy a particularly dangerous position in the castle community. Communication is essential during siege. Information must move between Dover and royal forces, friendly ports, commanders, or other supporters whenever routes permit. A messenger needs speed, local knowledge, discretion, and luck. Leaving the fortress may be more frightening than remaining inside. You imagine slipping through darkness with a letter concealed somewhere on your body. Enemy patrols occupy the surrounding landscape. Roads may be watched. Capture could expose both you and the information you carry. Suddenly delivering a message feels less like administrative work and more like volunteering to become extremely nervous in several different locations. Some communication may travel by sea. Dover's proximity to the Channel creates opportunities as well as danger. Maritime movement can bring news, supplies, or military assistance when conditions allow. Down near the coast, sailors inhabit another world of risk entirely. Weather can ruin plans without consulting either army. Ships depend upon wind, tide, crews, and navigation. A commander may desperately need a message delivered while the sea simply says no. Inside the castle, people wait. Waiting may be the most universal occupation of the siege. Soldiers wait for attacks, cooks wait for supplies, officials wait for news, families wait for loved ones. Children wait for adults to stop being strange and worried. You return to the room where the child has finally grown quiet. The woman nearby adjusts a covering. For a moment the scene is almost peaceful. Then you notice what everyone here has learned to ignore. A flea jumps from the bedding. You stare at it. The flea appears unconcerned by Prince Louis. King John, Magna Carta, papal politics, and the future constitutional development of England. Its interests are immediate. So are those of the lice hiding in clothing, the mice investigating food stores, and the smoke working its way into every piece of fabric you own. You scratch your arm. Perhaps nothing is there. That does not help. The room feels colder as the fire declines. A draft slides beneath the door. Someone adds another piece of wood. But fuel must be conserved too. You pull your cloak tighter. Outside. Winter is not yet at its deepest. But Dover's exposed position makes cold and wind persistent companions. The child sleeps, the needle continues moving, and while the castle community settles into another uneasy night. You begin to realise that surviving Dover may depend less on spectacular courage than on enduring 1,000 small discomforts without ever being allowed to leave. The itch on your arm becomes impossible to ignore. You scratch once, then again. Immediately you regret giving it attention, because now your shoulder seems itchy too, then your neck, then somewhere beneath your clothing that cannot conveniently be reached without dismantling half your medieval wardrobe. Perhaps there is a flea. Perhaps there are several. Perhaps your imagination has simply joined the siege. You decide not to investigate. The room around you has grown colder. The fire still burns, but its warmth occupies only a modest territory near the hearth. Move a few steps away and the stone resumes control. you pull your cloak tighter. This is one of the great corrections to the romantic castle of modern imagination. A fireplace can produce considerable heat, but large medieval chambers are difficult to warm evenly. Thick masonry moderates temperature in useful ways, yet stone interiors can feel damp and bitterly cold, especially when wind finds openings around doors, shutters, roofs, and passages. Dover is particularly exposed. The castle stands high above the channel, where weather arrives with enthusiasm. Wind pushes against walls, rain darkens stone, mist hides the coastline. During colder months, dampness settles into clothing and bedding, creating the unpleasant sensation that nothing is entirely dry. You edge closer to the hearth. Someone else has already claimed the best position. Of course, even warmth has hierarchy. A high-status resident can occupy the most comfortable chambers and command greater quantities of fuel, textiles, and bedding. Servants and ordinary soldiers make do with less desirable spaces. Wall hangings and curtains help. They are not merely decorative. Textiles can reduce drafts, soften rooms visually, and make elite chambers more comfortable. Bed curtains create a smaller enclosed space around a sleeper. Preserving warmth while offering something medieval, households rarely provide generously. Privacy. You remember the crowded rooms upstairs? A curtain suddenly seems luxurious. Fuel is the foundation beneath all this comfort. Wood must be cut, gathered, transported, stored, carried indoors and fed constantly to fires. Charcoal serves particular purposes as well, especially where concentrated heat is useful during siege conditions. Every piece of fuel becomes finite. You cannot casually send a servant into enemy-held countryside because the hall feels a little chilly, so fires may be managed carefully. Your toes object to military logistics. The man beside you extends his hands toward the flames. His fingers are cracked. Clothing protects him as much as architecture does. Medieval people understand layering very well. Linen garments can sit beneath woolen outer clothing, while cloaks, hoods, caps, gloves, and other items provide additional protection depending upon status and means. Wool is particularly useful in a damp climate. It insulates well and remains valuable even when conditions are unpleasant. Unfortunately, wool also becomes part of another intimate ecosystem. Lice can inhabit clothing, fleas thrive where humans and animals provide opportunities. Bedbugs have an ancient relationship with the civilization too. People attempt to control pests through cleaning, airing bedding, laundering, combing, herbs, fumigation, and other remedies, with varying success. Nobody simply accepts parasites as charming roommates. They are disliked. The difficulty is getting rid of them. One medieval remedy tradition recommends combinations of strongly scented plants or substances to repel unwanted creatures. Medical and household texts preserve an astonishing range of treatments, some sensible, some hopeful, and some capable of making the flea reconsider life mainly because everyone else has already left the room. You imagine applying a pungent herbal mixture to your bedding. Perhaps it works. Perhaps you simply become easier to locate in darkness. At least the flea knows where dinner is. You stand and stretch, your joints complain after sleeping on an unforgiving surface. Bedding quality varies enormously. The wealthy can possess feather beds, mattresses, fine sheets, blankets, quilts, and elaborate hangings. Lower status sleepers may rely on straw-filled pallets, simpler mattresses, blankets, cloaks, or communal arrangements. Fresh straw can be comfortable enough. Old damp straw becomes something else entirely. It traps smells. It shelters insects. It compresses. It acquires mysterious textures. You suddenly miss the floor. Then there is smoke. Smoke from hearths, smoke from lamps, smoke from candles, smoke drifting from kitchens, smoke entering through doors from outdoor fires. The smell embeds itself in hair and fabric until you stop noticing it. Your eyes may not stop noticing. Fireplaces and chimneys exist, but airflow is imperfect, especially in busy spaces or during poor weather. Smaller fires and portable lighting produce their own fumes. Cheap lighting often relies on tallow candles made from animal fat. They can smoke and smell more strongly than beeswax. Beeswax burns more cleanly and pleasantly, making it desirable for churches and wealthy households. so even your candle knows your social class. Night brings another challenge, darkness, real darkness. When the sun disappears, illumination becomes expensive labour. Candles consume material, oil lamps require fuel, torches are useful in some circumstances but smoky and inconvenient indoors. You therefore do not flood every room with light merely because darkness feels gloomy. People gather around available illumination. Work requiring precision becomes harder. Faces disappear beyond a few yards. Passages become shadowed. Stairs become traps designed by architecture to discover whether you are paying attention. You carry a small light through a corridor. The flame throws your own shadow against the wall. It stretches absurdly tall. A door opens ahead and you nearly jump out of your skin. A servant looks at you. You pretend nothing happened. Dignity survives another assault. Your destination is the privy. This is unfortunate. Castle toilets can be incorporated directly into masonry, with seats positioned over shafts or openings that allow waste to fall away from occupied rooms. Some garderobes empty into pits, others discharge externally depending upon design. They are practical, they are not pleasant. Cold air rises through openings, odour lingers, flies take professional interest. Privacy can be limited, and toilet paper has declined your invitation to the 13th century. People use whatever suitable materials custom and availability provide, including cloth, plant matter, or other humble solutions that rarely receive loving description from chroniclers. You sit briefly, a freezing draught rises from below. You reconsider every complaint you have ever made about a modern bathroom. One popular claim says medieval garderobes are called that because people store clothing there. Even the smell repels moths. The linguistic and practical story is much murkier than that neat explanation suggests. The word is connected with guarding or keeping clothing and later becomes associated with privies. But the familiar tale of deliberately hanging clothes beside human waste as pest control should not be treated as a universal medieval habit. History occasionally produces a disappointing result. The disgusting story is sometimes too good to be true. You leave quickly, outside. Rain has started. It strikes roofs and stone in a fine, steady pattern. Water gathers in uneven ground. Mud thickens where boots and animals pass repeatedly. The courtyard that felt merely dirty yesterday now develops ambitions toward becoming a pond. Drainage matters. Castle builders provide channels and slopes to move water away. But heavy use and bad weather still create mess. You step into mud. It accepts your shoe lovingly. Pull, nothing. Pull harder. Your foot comes free with a wet, sucking noise that several centuries of royal architecture cannot make dignified. A nearby soldier smirks. You continue walking as though this was deliberate. Illness is another persistent concern. Cold itself does not magically create disease, but crowded living conditions, poor ventilation, contaminated food or water, parasites, injuries, and inadequate sanitation all create opportunities for sickness. Medieval medical understanding operates through frameworks very different from modern germ theory. Learned medicine draws heavily upon humoral ideas inherited from ancient authorities. Interpreting health through balances involving blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, diet, environment, sleep, exercise, evacuation, and emotional states may all be considered when maintaining balance. A physician, if one is available, represents only one part of medical care. Surgeons handle wounds and practical procedures. Herbal knowledge circulates through households. Clergy offer spiritual care. Women often participate in nursing and domestic medicine. Most illness is managed without a university-trained doctor appearing dramatically at the bedside. Evidence for the exact medical personnel present during every phase of Dover's siege is thin. Accounts tell you far more about military events than about who treated a fever in a side chamber. The silence of the sources leaves everyday sickness largely invisible unless it affects someone important or changes the course of events. Yet people certainly become ill. You hear coughing behind a door, someone is lying beneath blankets, a cup of warmed liquid is carried inside. The siege does not pause. That may be the hardest part. Whether you're cold, exhausted, feverish, bitten by fleas, or suffering from the consequences of yesterday's questionable fish. The castle still requires work. The walls need watching, food needs preparing, water needs carrying. And now every discomfort reveals another division between people. One man sleeps beneath fine coverings, another beneath his cloak. One eats seasoned meat, another receives coarse bread. One can retreat into a private chamber, another shares a smoky room with 10 exhausted bodies and at least one extremely ambitious flea. The same walls protect everyone. They do not make everyone equal as you cross the wet yard. Lights glow from the great tower above. Some chambers are warmer than others, some tables are better supplied, some voices give orders while others obey. You've spent days learning how Dover survives as a community. Now you begin to notice exactly where each person stands within it. The lights in the great tower seem warmer from the courtyard than they actually are. You discover this as soon as you climb toward them. Your damp shoes leave marks on the floor. Rainwater still clings to your cloak, and somewhere behind you a servant is probably considering whether allowing you indoors was a serious administrative mistake. Ahead, a better chamber waits. The difference is immediate. There is more light here, better textiles, a larger fire, furniture that suggests its occupants expect other people to stand while they sit. Nothing about the room needs to announce wealth aloud. Comfort does the speaking. You've spent long enough inside Dover to understand that everyone is enduring the same siege, but they are certainly not enduring the same version of it. Rank follows you everywhere. It determines where you sleep, what you eat, what you wear, whose orders you obey, whether you possess a horse, how much privacy you enjoy, and how close you are permitted to stand to important people without somebody asking what exactly you think you are doing. At the summit of the castle community stands Hubert de Burgh as commander. His authority gives him access to information most defenders never hear. Officers report to him, clerks handle matters connected with command, decisions about defense, supplies, negotiations, and deployment pass through a hierarchy that eventually reaches the man standing in rain on a wall. But authority brings discomfort of its own. Hubert may receive better food than an ordinary soldier. He may sleep in a better chamber. He cannot stop being commander when he closes the door. If a gate fails at midnight, somebody wakes him. If supplies run low, the problem belongs to him. If morale collapses, it belongs to him. If Dover falls, history is unlikely to blame the kitchen boy. High status provides softer bedding and harder consequences. Below the commander stand knights and other men of military or administrative importance. A knight in 1216 is not merely a man wearing armour and searching enthusiastically for dragons. Knighthood is tied to social status, landholding, military service, household relationships, and an evolving culture of aristocratic identity. Not every mounted warrior possesses equal wealth, and the social meaning of knighthood continues changing across the medieval centuries. Equipment alone demonstrates inequality. A good mail hauberk represents enormous skilled labour. Iron must be produced and worked. Thousands upon thousands of small rings are formed and linked. A helmet requires craftsmanship. A sword of quality is valuable. A warhorse may cost far more than an ordinary labourer could imagine possessing. When an armoured knight passes you, you are looking at a walking concentration of wealth. You're also looking at someone who still needs help getting everything organised. Elite warriors rely on attendants, servants, grooms, craftsmen, and other support. The splendid horse needs feeding, the mail needs maintenance, weapons need care. Clothing needs repair, status does not remove dependence. It multiplies the number of people involved in maintaining it. You descend toward a less comfortable room. Here several ordinary fighting men occupy shared space. The fire is smaller, the smell is stronger. There are fewer textiles between skin and stone. Someone has hung a damp clothing where it might dry. It is not drying. One man is repairing a strap, another eats bread. A third sleeps with the remarkable commitment of someone who could remain unconscious during the collapse of Normandy. These men are essential to Dover. Crossbowmen in particular can be valued specialists. Skilled missile troops appear repeatedly in royal service during this period, and John has relied heavily on professional soldiers, including men recruited from outside England. This complicates any easy picture of nationality inside the fortress. A defender serving the English king may not have been born in England. A rebel outside may have been. Language does not provide a neat dividing line either. Anglo-Norman French remains deeply embedded in aristocratic culture. While Latin dominates many formal records, and English exists in numerous spoken forms among the wider population, walk through Dover, and you may hear several linguistic worlds overlapping. The castle is less like a patriotic movie, and more like an international workplace with extremely poor health insurance. A crossbowman looks up as you pass. You nod. He returns to his strap. His status is below the great aristocrats, but his military skill gives him practical value. During an assault, nobody sensible tells the experienced missile specialist that his social pedigree is insufficient to shoot the enemy. Necessity rearranges importance without abolishing hierarchy. Then there are clerks. Their clothing and equipment differ from the soldiers around them, yet written administration gives them access to power. Literacy is unevenly distributed. The ability to compose a formal letter, understand accounts, preserve records, or handle legal language creates influence that cannot be measured in armour. A clerk may never lift a sword in battle. He can still determine whose pay is recorded. Be polite to the clerk. Some truths are eternal. Farther down the social ladder, servants perform work so constant that you have nearly stopped noticing it. That itself is revealing. A servant carries fuel into a room and disappears. Another removes dirty vessels. Someone fetches water. Someone cleans. Someone prepares bedding. Someone handles waste. Their labour makes elite comfort appear effortless. It is not effortless. It is simply effort performed by someone else. Household service can contain its own hierarchy. A trusted senior servant may hold responsibilities and privileges far beyond those of a young assistant. Specialised roles differ from heavy manual labour. Proximity to an important lord can create opportunities unavailable to people technically outside the household. Medieval rank is not a single ladder with perfectly spaced rungs. It is a forest of relationships. Birth matters, office matters, skill matters, patronage matters. Money matters, whom you serve matters, and sometimes being useful at exactly the right moment matters very much indeed. The siege makes this visible. A mason who understands a damaged wall may suddenly command everyone's attention. A carpenter who can reinforce a gate becomes more valuable than someone with a magnificent family tree and no idea which end of a hammer to hold. A messenger who successfully slips through enemy lines can influence decisions made miles away. For a brief moment, practical necessity pushes against social convention. Then dinner arrives, and everyone remembers where they're supposed to sit. Dining displays hierarchy with almost theatrical clarity. Important individuals occupy prestigious positions. Food is distributed according to status. Better cuts and greater variety gravitate upward. Lower members of the household receive simpler fare. Even bread can reflect distinction through grain, quality, and preparation. You watch a serving arrangement unfold and realize that everyone can identify rank without needing a chart. Who sits, who stands, who serves, who receives first, who speaks freely, who waits. These tiny behaviors teach hierarchy from childhood. One small dining custom reveals how thoroughly status and practicality intertwine. At wealthy tables, a carver may hold a specialized role, and carving meat properly can be treated as a skilled, even prestigious service rather than mere kitchen labor. Manuals of courtesy eventually describe elaborate expectations surrounding carving and service. Apparently even cutting dinner can become a career path if you make enough rules around it. The siege complicates these rituals. Food shortages encourage simpler arrangements. Crowding reduces privacy. Military urgency interrupts meals. A nobleman cannot insist upon perfect ceremony while a wall is collapsing nearby. Yet hierarchy survives remarkably well under pressure. Perhaps it even becomes more important when everything else feels uncertain. Familiar social order reassures some people. Others may find it irritating. You imagine an exhausted labourer watching an officer receive better food after both spent the day under bombardment. Does resentment grow? Possibly. Does he accept the difference as natural? Perhaps. Does he think about it at all while hungry? You cannot know. Personal reactions from ordinary defenders rarely survive. Accounts, rolls, architectural remains, and elite narratives expose structures of rank more readily than private emotions. Modern interpretations therefore have to resist turning silence into either cheerful acceptance or hidden rebellion. The safest conclusion is wonderfully human. Different people probably felt differently. You continue downward toward the most restricted spaces. A guarded door reminds you that another category exists inside castles. Prisoners. Dover has long possessed strategic and administrative importance, and castles can serve as places of confinement as well as defence. Captives vary enormously in treatment according to status and political value. An important noble prisoner may be worth ransom. That value can protect him. A poorer captive has fewer advantages. Medieval imprisonment is often less standardised than your modern image of rows of identical cells. People may be confined in towers, rooms, guarded chambers, or secure spaces according to circumstances. The cliché of every prisoner chained permanently in a dripping underground dungeon belongs more to the later imagination than universal medieval practice. Though, to be fair, being locked in any room in 1216 while an enemy throws stones at the building is sufficiently unpleasant. You turn away from the guarded space. Outside, the rain has stopped. Clouds break over the channel and weak sunlight reaches the walls. For a few minutes everyone emerges into the same pale light. Commander, knight, crossbowman, clerk, cook, servant, labourer, child, different clothing, different meals, different beds, the same siege. Then a rider's arrival sends movement through the yard. News passes upward. Something has changed beyond Dover, not at the walls. In the kingdom, King John, whose failing authority created the crisis surrounding you, is approaching the end of his life. No one inside Dover yet understands how completely that death will transform the war. But the balance outside these walls is about to shift. The news does not arrive as a dramatic proclamation. It arrives in pieces. A rider, a hurried conversation, an officer summoned from one part of the castle, a clerk carrying information toward another. Then the words begin moving through Dover, passing from people who know something to people who know slightly less, until the whole fortress seems to be whispering, "King John is dead." For several moments, the sentence feels impossible. The king has been the fixed point around which the entire crisis turns. Barons rebel against him, Louis challenges him. Hubert remains loyal to him, papal support gathers around his cause. Men inside Dover endure bombardment partly because they refuse to abandon his authority. And now he is gone. John dies at Newark in October 1216, after falling ill during a campaign across eastern England. His final weeks have already acquired stories that will cling to his reputation for centuries, including the famous loss of baggage in the Wash. The exact scale and contents of that disaster are difficult to recover beneath later storytelling, but John does lose valuable baggage during the dangerous crossing of tidal terrain. It is an almost painfully appropriate ending to his reign. After years of losing territory, allies, confidence, and control, even his luggage seems to join the opposition. His death should help Louis, at first glance. It removes the king whose supporters have been resisting him. Instead, it changes the political logic of the war. John's heir is Henry, a boy only 9 years old. That matters enormously. Rebel barons who despise John no longer need to choose between John and Louis. John is gone. They can choose between a foreign adult prince supported by one coalition and an English royal child whose government can promise reconciliation. The emotional temperature of the conflict begins to change. You feel that change inside Dover before you can fully explain it. People speak differently. The question is no longer simply whether John can recover his kingdom. It becomes whether the kingdom can be recovered for Henry III. William Marshal emerges as one of the central figures supporting the young king. Already elderly by the standards of an active warrior, Marshal possesses extraordinary prestige from decades of service and aristocratic politics. Henry is crowned at Gloucester on 28 October 1216. The ceremony cannot proceed in the usual way at Westminster because London remains under Louis's control. Even the royal regalia are unavailable. and later tradition famously associates the young king's coronation with a simple circlet rather than the customary crown. Picture the child, 9 years old, a kingdom divided, London held by his rival, his father dead, some of the most powerful nobles in England recently fighting against his family, and adults placing a crown or something serving as one upon his head. No pressure. The new royal government moves quickly. One of its cleverest decisions is to reissue Magna Carta in Henry's name. This changes the charter's political meaning. Under John, Magna Carta emerged from confrontation and coercion. Under the minority government, a revised version can become an instrument of reconciliation, a way of telling rebels that grievances may be addressed without supporting Louis. Not every clause survives unchanged. The document evolves, but the strategy works gradually. The war does not end overnight. You're still inside a besieged castle. Enemy camps do not vanish simply because a 9-year-old has been crowned elsewhere. Yet the reason for continuing resistance now feels stronger. Dover has held long enough for politics to move. That is one of the quiet powers of a fortress. A castle does not always need to destroy an enemy army. Sometimes it only needs to refuse to fall until circumstances change. You climb the walls. The enemy remains below. Their fires still burn. Their equipment still stands. Men still move through the siege lines. But the campaign has cost time. Louis has not secured the quick victory he wanted at Dover. Hubert's resistance forces him to commit attention and resources to a fortress that continues threatening his position near the Channel. Eventually, Louis agrees to a truce at Dover and withdraws from the immediate siege. Although the struggle for England continues into 1217, the castle has survived the first great test. There is no magical moment when everyone suddenly realizes they are safe. Guards remain cautious, repairs continue, food remains precious. Nobody dismantles defences because somebody heard encouraging political news. You have lived here long enough to know better. Stone remembers pressure. Damaged sections remain damaged. Timber barriers stay where they may still be needed. The defenders understand that Louis can return, and he does. The wider war continues. During 1217, the royalist cause under Henry III's government grows stronger. Some rebels reconsider their allegiance. Political support shifts. Then comes Lincoln. In May 1217, royalist forces led by William Marshall defeat Louis's supporters at the Battle of Lincoln. The battle becomes a major turning point. Louis himself is not commanding inside the city at that moment, but his cause suffers badly. For Dover, however, the Channel remains crucial. Louis still depends upon connection with France. Men, supplies, money, and reinforcements can cross the water. As long as that maritime link remains effective, the struggle is not finished, and so Dover's story reaches beyond its walls. Hubert de Burgh, the commander you have watched ration food and inspect defences, becomes associated with another decisive episode, the naval Battle of Sandwich in August 1217. English forces intercept a French fleet bringing reinforcements under Eustace the Monk. One of the most colourful figures anywhere near this war, Eustace has been, at different points in his remarkable life. A monk, outlaw, mercenary, and naval commander. Yes, a monk turned sea captain. Apparently choosing one career was insufficient. Stories surrounding Eustace become heavily embroidered in later literature, so separating the historical man from the legend requires care. What is clear is that he plays an important role in Louis's maritime support and dies after the English victory at Sandwich. The French fleet's defeat badly weakens Louis's ability to sustain his campaign from Dover's heights. This outcome feels almost inevitable when you look at the sea. Almost. But remember how dangerous hindsight is. Nothing about these waters guarantees English victory. Ships are vulnerable to wind. Crews make mistakes. Commanders take risks. Naval fighting in this period can involve closing with enemy vessels, missile fire, boarding, and brutal hand-to-hand struggle. One detail from accounts of Sandwich describes the English using quicklime against their opponents, supposedly throwing or releasing it so that wind carried the irritating powder toward French sailors. Whether every colourful detail in later descriptions should be accepted exactly as told is another question. But medieval naval combat certainly rewards ingenuity. Imagine standing on a deck while someone weaponizes building material. You would immediately miss the fleas. The victory at Sandwich helps make Lewis's position untenable. Negotiations follow. In September 1217, the Treaty of Lambeth brings his English adventure to an end. Louis abandons his claim to the English throne and leaves the kingdom. Many rebels are reconciled with Henry III's government. The invasion or civil war with foreign intervention, depending on which part of the tangled conflict you emphasize, is over. Dover has endured. You walk along the wall where you once watched enemy camps multiply across the landscape. Now, the ground below looks different. Some traces remain. Disturbed earth, damaged defences, abandoned works, scars where men dug and attacked. But the pressure has lifted. The quiet feels strange. You have become accustomed to danger having a schedule. A distant hammer used to mean preparation. A shout meant alarm. Movement on the road demanded attention. Now a cart may simply be a cart. Your body has not received the message. A sudden noise still makes you turn. A guard still studies the horizon longer than necessary. Someone still checks a repaired barrier out of habit. Survival creates routines that outlive the danger that produced them. The castle itself changes too. Damage must be repaired. The siege has exposed weaknesses in Dover's defences, particularly around vulnerable approaches. Later work strengthens and develops the fortress further. Part of the long process by which Dover evolves across centuries rather than remaining frozen in Henry II's original design. That is why trying to imagine the exact castle of 1216 requires peeling away later alterations. The walls visible to future visitors contain many different Dovers: Plantagenet Dover, later medieval Dover, Tudor adaptations, defences reshaped for gunpowder, Napoleonic works, modern military occupation. Every generation adds another layer, but you're still standing in the layer where Lewis failed. The sun lowers toward the channel, for once. No enemy machinery interrupts it. Smoke rises from ordinary fires. Someone leads a horse across the yard. A kitchen worker carries a vessel through a doorway. A soldier laughs at something you cannot hear. After everything, ordinary life has returned with almost insulting ease. Tomorrow there will be repairs, accounts, cleaning, cooking, guard duty, arguments about supplies, complaints about weather. The castle survives not by becoming permanently heroic, but by becoming ordinary again. You rest your hands against the parapet. The stone is cold, the same cold you felt when you first arrived, yet it no longer feels unfamiliar. Below you, evening gathers across Dover. Behind you, fires begin glowing in chambers. The fortress settles toward night, and now that the armies are fading from view, you can finally listen to what remains when history stops shouting. What remains is surprisingly quiet, not silent. Dover Castle is almost never truly silent while people live inside it. There are too many boots, animals, doors, fires, bells, tools, voices, and restless sleepers for that. But the sounds have lost the sharp edge they carried during the siege. A hammer strikes somewhere below. Once. That noise would have made you wonder whether miners were beneath the wall. Now somebody's repairing a roof. You smile at the difference. A cart rattles across the yard. Its wheels bump over uneven ground, and a servant calls for someone to move aside. Horses stamp near their shelter. From a kitchen comes the familiar percussion of pots, followed by a brief argument whose subject seems to be bread. Wonderful. Civilization has survived sufficiently for people to complain about dinner. You descend from the battlements at an unhurried pace. The stones beneath your feet are familiar now. You know which passage catches the wind, where smoke tends to linger, which courtyard becomes mud after rain, and which staircase seems determined to make every journey slightly more tiring than necessary. You have learned Dover through your body. Cold fingers, aching legs, smoke in your eyes, wool against your skin, the weight of water carried upstairs, the smell of horses, the warmth of bread, the tiny private luxury of standing near a fire before somebody more important occupies the best place. This is what living inside a castle means, not merely residing inside architecture, adapting yourself to it. Dover's famous Great Tower was raised under Henry II during the Great Building Campaign of the later 12th century, and it was designed to express royal authority as clearly as it provided formidable accommodation and defence. Yet no king, however powerful, could make the building function alone. That lesson has followed you through every room. Walls need masons, doors need carpenters, horses need grooms, documents need clerks, altars need priests, meals need cooks. Clothes need mending, weapons need maintaining, waste needs removing, and somebody always needs to carry water. When history remembers Dover in 1216, it naturally remembers Hubert de Burgh. It remembers Prince Louis. It remembers King John's collapsing reign, the disputed crown, the siege, the mining, the damaged defences, and the refusal to surrender. Those events deserve attention. Dover mattered. Its resistance complicated Louis's campaign at a moment when his prospects in England were genuinely formidable. After John's death, support for the young Henry III gradually consolidated, and the political circumstances surrounding the conflict changed. The following year brought Lincoln, Sandwich, negotiation, and Louis's departure from a distance. This becomes a clean sequence. Victory, settlement, but you have spent too long inside the walls to experience it that way. You remember waiting. That is what the dates leave out. Waiting for the next stone, waiting for news, waiting for bread, waiting for relief, waiting for an enemy attack that might begin in 5 minutes or 5 days, waiting to discover whether the ground beneath your feet was being hollowed away. History knows what happened next. You did not. Neither did the people here. That uncertainty makes their endurance more impressive. They did not defend Dover because they had read the final page. They defended it while the ending remained unwritten. You cross the courtyard, a child runs past before being called back by an adult. Perhaps that child will remember the siege. Perhaps years from now the memories will become exaggerated. The stones will have seemed larger, the enemy more numerous, the noises louder. Memory does that. Stories grow around frightening experiences, especially when repeated across generations. Medieval chroniclers do something similar in written form. They select episodes, emphasize moral lessons, praise certain figures, condemn others, and sometimes preserve details that modern readers would desperately like to verify but cannot. The story of Dover therefore reaches you through imperfect windows. Administrative records offer one kind of view. Chronicles offer another. Architecture and archaeology add others. None provides the complete experience of a single anonymous person walking through this yard on one ordinary evening after danger has passed. Even the number and identity of everyone sheltering here at particular moments remain beyond exact recovery. The gaps matter. They prevent you from pretending certainty where none exists. But they also invite a quieter kind of historical imagination. Not invention without limits, something gentler. You take what is known: the walls, the conflict, the household structures, foodways, weapons, religious practices, material culture, and ask what those realities would feel like to inhabit. How cold is the stone? How far does a bell carry at night? How quickly does smoke cling to wool? How heavy is a bucket after 3 flights of stairs? Those questions bring you closer to people whose names are gone. You enter the great tower one final time. The doorway absorbs you into shadow. Inside. The evening fire gives the chamber a warm centre. People gather around it according to the invisible map of rank you have learned so well. An important person sits nearer. Someone lower in status stands farther away. A servant enters carrying fuel. Hierarchy survives Louis. Of course it does. The siege has not transformed Dover into an egalitarian paradise. No one emerges from the battered gate announcing universal social reform. This is still the 13th century. But crisis has exposed dependencies that hierarchy prefers to hide. The commander depended upon the crossbowman. The crossbowman depended upon the baker. The baker depended upon grain handlers, fuel carriers, millers, water carriers, and countless others. Even a fortress built to display royal power reveals how thoroughly power depends upon labour. One small object captures that world rather nicely. A medieval key can be a substantial iron thing, sometimes beautifully shaped, sometimes brutally practical. During ordinary life, it controls a chest, door, store, or chamber. During siege, that humble key becomes part of security. Who holds it matters. Where it is kept matters. Lose it at the wrong moment, and an object small enough for your hand can become more urgent than a sword. History is full of such objects. Keys, needles, buckets, dice, candles. Things too ordinary to dominate chronicles, but essential to living. You pass the chapel, the door is partly open, a small light burns within. Perhaps someone will pray there before sleeping. Perhaps gratitude feels appropriate now. Or grief. Survival is rarely clean enough to produce only celebration. Some people who entered the siege will not return to their former routines. Others may carry injuries. Families beyond the castle have endured disruption. Homes and fields around military operations may have suffered. Victory for one side does not rewind the landscape. The political settlement itself remains unfinished in a broader sense. Henry III's reign will stretch for decades, and Magna Carta will be reissued again, developing a significance far beyond the immediate baronial crisis that first produced it. Nobody here can see those centuries ahead. To them, tomorrow is enough. You step outside again. Darkness has settled fully. Stars appear where clouds permit them. The channel is mostly invisible, but you can hear the wind coming from it. A guard walks his route. Yes, there are still guards. Peace does not persuade Dover to forget geography. The castle will remain important because the narrow sea remains narrow. France remains close. Kings will continue worrying about invasion. Future generations will modify these defences repeatedly as weapons change. Centuries later, soldiers will still occupy this same strategic height. The technology will become almost unimaginable to your 13th century companions. Gunpowder, cannon, rifles, telephones, electric lights, aircraft, radar, deep tunnels filled with modern military personnel. Yet the basic reason for watching the channel will feel strangely familiar. Look outward, watch the crossing, protect the gateway. You place your hand against the parapet. Cold stone, again. It has been here throughout your journey. At first it represented royal power, then protection, then confinement. During bombardment it became fragile. During the mining it became frighteningly dependent upon the earth beneath it. Now it is simply stone again. Perhaps that is Dover's final lesson. Castles look permanent, the people inside them know better. Walls crack, kings die, claims disappear, armies leave, political loyalties change. Even the fortress itself is rebuilt until one century rests upon another. What persists is human routine. Someone lights the morning fire. Someone breaks bread. Someone complains about rain. Someone checks a sleeping child. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone takes the next watch. And tonight, for the first time in what feels like a very long while, you're allowed to become simply tired. You leave the wall. No alarm follows. No projectile crosses the darkness. Only the wind moves over Dover, and you follow the small glow of firelight towards sleep. The castle grows softer around you now. You no longer need to listen for digging beneath the earth, or measure every distant sound against the possibility of attack. Let those noises drift away. The hammer becomes only a faint tap somewhere beyond the room. The horses settle. The kitchen fire lowers into embers. You find a place near the warmth. Your cloak loosens around your shoulders. The stone is still cool, but it no longer asks anything from you, beyond the walls. The dark channel stretches toward a horizon you cannot see. Somewhere far across it are roads, towns, fields, and sleeping households. Here, high above Dover, another household settles into rest. A final footstep passes your door, then another, farther away. You hear the tiny crackle of the fire. Nothing needs repairing tonight. Nothing needs carrying. The bucket can remain where it is. The clerk can put down his quill. The guard outside will keep watch for you. Even Hubert can disappear now into the distance of history, along with John and Louis. their arguments fading until crowns and charters become no louder than turning pages. You have only the room, the dim fire, the weight of the blankets. Let the battlements dissolve into darkness. Let the cold white cliffs disappear beneath the night. You have walked the walls, climbed the tower, tasted the bread, breathed the smoke, heard the bells, and waited through the siege. But you do not need to wait anymore. Your breathing slows, the fortress settles, and somewhere above the sleeping castle, the channel wind moves gently through the darkness, touching old stone, passing onward, and leaving you safely behind the walls. Sweet dreams.